for curriculum development in critical anti-Semitism studies. It's wonderful to see some familiar faces and some new faces, so welcome everybody. I'm Charles Small, I'm the director of ISGAP, and on behalf of the ISGAP team, El Shaddai, Ira, and Daphne, I'd like to welcome everybody to this program. We're going to have a short introduction by Natan Sharansky. Natan is the chairman of ISGAP, and he's going to give us a few brief remarks. And when he's finished, I'll give an introduction to the Summer Institute and to the program this evening and throughout the week. And everybody here will have a moment to introduce themselves to each other. And last year, I think now we're all experts in Zoom and virtual meetings. Last year, we really had excellent sessions, and I think it was much more personable than we imagined. So I hope this year we can repeat the same thing and develop a sense of camaraderie and explore the issues and the debates together as a group. I also want to acknowledge Bennie is on the line. Dennis is the president of ISGAP. He's sitting in Toronto, and he's there. So I think when Natan is finished, if Dennis can say a few words of welcome as well, that would be wonderful. Impromptu, I haven't asked him to do it, so excuse me for the late invitation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Natan Sharansky. As many of you know, Natan is a leading human rights activist and a hero of the Jewish community, and I think the human rights community internationally. He was a prisoner of conscience and led the struggle for the rights of Soviet Jews to live free as Jewish citizens, but also to immigrate to Israel. He was a founding member of the Helsinki group, which monitored violations of international agreements of different religious and national groups in the Soviet Union. He worked closely with Andrei Sakharov, the renowned Soviet human rights activist, and kept close contact with foreign media that was beyond the Iron Curtain. In 1977, a Soviet newspaper alleged that Mr. Sharansky was collaborating with the CIA. Despite denials from every level of government in the United States, Mr. Sharansky was found guilty and sentenced to 13 years in prison, including solitary confinement and hard labor. In the courtroom prior to the announcement of his verdict, Mr. Sharansky stood up and said, and I quote, "To the court, I have nothing to say. To my wife and the Jewish people, I say next year in Jerusalem." After 9 years of imprisonment due to intense international campaign that was led by his wife, Avital, Mr. Sharansky was eventually released on the 11th of February, 1986, and migrated to Israel and lives in Jerusalem to this day. In Israel, he became an active in the integration of the Soviet Jews. There was a mass migration of Soviet Jews in the late 1980s. And dedicated his life to helping the new Israeli immigrants obtain education and become absorbed into the public political body. The final chapter of this historic struggle was the release of Soviet Jews, was the historic rally with over 250,000 people in Washington in 1987, which Mr. Sharansky was the initiator and driving force. This was during Mikhail Gorbachev's visit to the United States. In 1996, he established Yisrael B'Aliyah. It's a political party in order to help accelerate the integration of new immigrants into Israeli society. He served in 4 successive Israeli governments and was the minister and deputy. He had several ministerial portfolios and was also the deputy prime minister. In 2009, he was appointed chairman of the executive committee of the Jewish Agency for Israel. The mission of the Jewish Agency is to guarantee the future of the Jewish people by strengthening connections of every Jew to the state of Israel and to the Jewish people as a whole. In 2018, he received the highest Israeli award, the Israel Prize, for promoting Aliyah, or migration to Israel, and the ingathering of exiles from around the world. Mr. Sharansky is also the recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He's the only non-American citizen, living citizen, who is the recipient of these 2 highest American awards. In 2020, Mr. Sharansky was the recipient of the Genesis Prize. He's also the author of 3 books, Fear No Evil, The Case of Democracy and Defending Identity. And I urge all of you to read his books. They're very insightful and there are much wisdom in it. Excuse me. He remains a champion of the right of all people to live in freedom and believes that the advancement of human rights is critical to peace and security around the world. So it's really an honor and a privilege to invite Mr. Sharansky to speak in the opening remarks of this Summer Institute. Natan.
Thank you, Charles. Dear friends, it's really unfortunate that Corona prevented us from having our seminar in Oxford. And personally, me, Corona prevented in the last month from participating fully in our seminar and giving a lecture. That's why I have to restrict myself to few remarks. But Charles, after such a long historical introduction, I have no choice but to go a little bit to the history. We are just now coming to the 20th anniversary of the first Durban conference against racism. And it was rather shocking. Then I was in the Israeli government, and though we understood this, that there'll be a lot of criticism, but nevertheless, the fact that the main conference of United Nations against, and the first conference of its kind, against racism, just in the time when there was still the results of the ethnic cleansing in Yugoslavia, and ethnic cleansing continued in Darfur, and China continued destroying the cultures of Uyghurs and Tibetans, and Russia continued its war in Chechnya with all the racial hatred which went out of it. At that very moment, the only topic of the conference and the only country for full condemnation for racism was Israel. So I have to say it was rather shocking, and many people then were comparing it with 1975, when the United Nations passed a resolution that Zionism is racism. But I have to tell you the difference. In 1975, I was a young dissident of the Soviet Union, and all this decision of United Nations was led by Soviet Union and communist bloc, the bloc of Muslim countries, which had majority of the United Nations. And all the free world was against it. So we were not surprised, because Soviet Union's policy of anti-Semitism was the daily life. And there was practically, when Soviet Union was speaking against Jews who were poisoning the Soviet leaders, or when Soviet Union was speaking against Zionist state, it was the same language, it was the same cartoons. And for us, it was so natural that anti-Semitism is a part of totalitarian regime, because that's how the totalitarian regime needs enemies, internal and external enemies. And there is no better traditional internal and external enemy for Soviet Union than Jews and Jewish state. So connection was obvious. But 20 years ago, 25 years after that resolution, not only all the struggle was behind us and the prisons were behind us, so we have won. Soviet Union ceased to exist. So it seemed so natural that in the free world, at least, there will be no need to explain the connection between demonization of Jews and demonization of the state of Israel. And nevertheless, that resolution or that seminar in Durban, when so many representatives of the free world expressed as a minimum understanding to this criticism. And I remember again and again, I had to argue with political leaders that not everything is legitimate criticism of Israel, that at some moment it can become anti-Semitism. And that's when this idea of 3D demonization, the legitimization double standard, that anti-Semitism can be in different forms. Demonizing, when you are demonizing Jewish state, it's the same tool that demonizing Jews, and the same about double standard and the legitimization. And in fact, this argument or this debate about connection between different forms of anti-Semitism continues. And it's not finished. And not only not finished, just now when anti-Semitism grows in all its forms on the left and the right, it's very important to see this connection. Anti-Semitism, of course, it's true that anti-Semitism has an analogy of hatred towards other people in different countries. But anti-Semitism is not only the most old hatred, it's very plastic. It's changed its forms. It's went through different civilizations, through different cultures. And we can be successful in fighting anti-Semitism. And we can be successful in learning lessons for the other races, struggles against racism, only if you will see this connection. And that's why I see the importance of ISGAP and our seminar and the work which Charles and his colleagues are doing. And what can be done during this seminar if we can build this deep connection between different types of anti-Semitism. And I hope it will help to each of you to build the successful curriculum fighting anti-Semitism on all the fronts simultaneously. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a very successful and fruitful seminar.
Thank you very much, Natan. Thanks for being here. I know it wasn't easy, and thank you for your leadership of ISGAP and well beyond the confines of ISGAP for all you do for human rights and for the Jewish people. So feel well and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to call upon Dennis Bennie. Dennis is the president of the advisory board of ISGAP and single-handedly has helped to develop ISGAP as a proper organization. He's sitting in Toronto. He's a leader of the Canadian Jewish community and an entrepreneur and a mensch and a wonderful partner to have on the ISGAP team. So Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charles. I just have a very short thank you to you all for attending. It's an absolute privilege to work with Natan, who's been a childhood mentor, hero of mine. It's a privilege to work with Charles, who's dedicated his life to this cause. And it's important for me to thank you all for participating, because we're at a time when all your participation is so necessary. It is so vital and crucially important for all of us to move what we're going to learn over the next few days out of an echo chamber and into the real world, because we truly have a crisis and a challenge. And my job really is to make sure that we have adequate finances in order to undertake all the programs and all the important work that ISGAP is doing. And once again, I want to assure you that we're doing a good job. Charles has been wonderfully supportive and effective at raising funds to grow ISGAP. And I just want to wish you all a successful and meaningful program over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Thanks for all you do, and thank you for your words. So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start the program, but before we begin the program, I know it's going to be slightly unwieldy, but I would like everybody to introduce yourselves, and we'll try to create a virtual community. And some of us are here sitting in Pembroke College in Oxford. There's a few of us here, and there'll be more here tomorrow. So if I can call on people really just to introduce yourselves, where are you from, why are you here, and just take literally 45 seconds or so to do it, because we're a large group, but it would be nice if we could begin to make a bit of a connection. So the first person on my screen is David Klein. So David, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I am professor of history at San Diego State, so joining you from California. I am a professor of race and religion, and we've been dealing with some interesting things on our campus lately. So here to launch a new class and learn from you all. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and welcome. The next person I see on my screen is Alexandra Fishman, who's sitting here at Pembroke College. So Alexandra.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra. There's going to be the echo because I'm here. I am a PhD.
So Alex, you need to mute your own computer. And then Charles unmute El Shaddai's computer, and then the audio should work.
You sure? Okay.
Okay. I'm Alexandra Fishman. I'm a PhD student at Yeshiva. My dissertation topic is on antisemitism, specifically religious climate on college campuses. I also teach undergrad and graduate classes at Orthodox University and research classes at Yeshiva.
Thank you. Welcome. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Alexandra. The next person on the screen I see is Christine Maxwell.
Hi, Maxwell.
Christine, please speak a bit louder.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is that better? Might be easier. Want to come up there? Yeah. Sorry. Hi, everyone. So my name is Christine Maxwell. I very recently completed my doctorate at the University of Texas at Dallas. And my thesis was on the book as Provocative Artifact, a new relevancy for Holocaust literature in the 21st century. But my focus is on combating anti-Semitism. That's what I see my life part of what I think I can contribute to, and having an opportunity to work on a curriculum at this workshop is something I'm immensely looking forward to do. I have been a grade school teacher in the past, and I have some very exciting ideas, and I look forward to learning from everyone here. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So the next person on the screen that I see is Brandy. Brandy, can you please say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Brandy Shufatinsky. I'm a social worker. I recently completed my doctorate in international and multicultural education. And over the past year and a half, I've been working with a group of people addressing a lot of the anti-Semitism and biases and Marxist ideologies that's been embedded in the ethnic studies model curriculum in the state of California.
Thank you, Brandy. Welcome. Thanks. And the next person on the screen I see is Victor Menko Heckerman. Please say hello.
Hello to everyone. I'm from Colombia, South America. I'm a student of the PhD program in comparative studies at Florida Atlantic University near Miami. There I work as a teaching assistant for Holocaust studies and Spanish. I teach both. I'm interested in learning more about anti-Semitism to apply this knowledge to my classes. But also I would like to integrate it to my research interests in order to decolonize the canon of the Caribbean literature, where, for example, Sephardic Jewish literature is kind of put aside like normally. So I'm here to enjoy and to learn a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you. Welcome. The next person I see on the screen is Dana Barnett. Welcome, Dana.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me. Can you hear me properly?
Yeah.
Good. I'm a researcher of academic related issues such as BDS, anti-Semitism, delegitimization of Israel. And I write about these topics on a weekly basis. I'm very open-minded to learn new ideas and circumstances, and shall see what we can learn here from all of you.
Thank you, Dana. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person I see here on my screen who's here with us at Pembroke is Max Horder. So Max.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? My name is Max Horder. I'm from London, UK, but I'm currently doing my PhD at Princeton, and I study anthropology. And one of the things I'm really interested in studying is populism and its various reverberations, and especially around the conspiracies around George Soros, which is a sort of constant in a lot of populist discourse at the moment, and has obviously very strong anti-Semitic overtones and undertones.
Thank you, Max, and welcome. The next person I see on the screen is Noah Crossman. Noah?
Hi, yes,
Hi.
Thank you, Noah Krasman. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm currently a master's student in the University of Haifa at the Weiss Livnat International MA in Holocaust Studies. I'm from Michigan in the US, and I'm currently writing about anti-Semitism in the UK, but that's not, it's been already mentioned how serious it feels in the world, and I've begun to take it more seriously since I've been here. So thank you, and it's an honor.
Thanks, Noah, welcome. The next person I see is Shai Atias. Shai, Dr. Shai, the floor is yours. You're muted.
Yeah. So hi everyone. Thank you for having me, and I'm very grateful for the ability to participate in something outside of Israel during the COVID-19. It's a great appreciation for your great efforts for having us. I'm a lecturer in Bar-Ilan University, teaching in communication school and the political science department. I'm specializing in diplomatic studies. And beside, in continuation to the early speakers, distinguished early speakers, why am I here? So beside the fact that I'm a former government official that dealt with that, and now a professor and a researcher, I'm also a second generation to a Holocaust survivor and an Israeli guy. So it's a mixed feeling between my identity and to my strong will to research the field. And just to be a bit more specific and finish, I'm actually writing and research right now about the BDS from a perspective of analyzing the type of the boycott and the type of the actor from international relations perspective.
Thank you, Shai. Welcome. Nice that you're here. The next person on the screen I see is Seda Yazyan. I hope I pronounced your name not too badly. So
yes.
Seda, welcome.
Yes. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Seda. I am originally from Istanbul, Turkey, and I live in Chicago. Right now, I am in Istanbul due to my mom health condition because she got 7 hours bypass surgery. Actually, I was planning to start my PhD this fall, but because of her critical condition, I will start in spring. The reason that I am interested in anti-Semitism and the Holocaust studies, because I visit Germany, Poland, and Lithuania, and I feel the pain. Also, my husband is from Bosnia. He faced with the genocide. Also, my father's side is from East Turkestan, Xinjiang area from China. So I know what is anti-Semitism, what is xenophobia and Islamophobia. So I'm here to learn and engage more. Special thanks to Dr. Cannon from Northeastern Illinois University, because she informed me about this program, and I am here Thanks for everyone.
Thank you very much, Seda. Welcome. Thank you. The next person on the screen is Paula Morantz-Cohn. Paula.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I am in Philadelphia. I'm dean at Drexel University. I'm an English professor. And I'm here because this past year I've become more concerned about anti-Semitism and also how to speak about it in the current climate and with my students and with my staff as well. And so along with the idea of teaching a course or having someone in my college teach a course, I really need a vocabulary with which to address these issues. And that's what I'm hoping that this course will give me. Thank you.
Wonderful. We're honored that you're here, and we need more scholars and deans and managers, administrators to participate on this emerging subject matter. As you'll see, the universities are really very much the front line of many of these issues. So welcome, Paula. The next person on the screen I see is Ria Radie. Ria, welcome.
Hi, yeah, I'm Ria, and I'm a senior from OP Jindal Global University in India, and I've always had an interest to study about the Holocaust, genocidal practices, and about anti-Semitism studies, and I'm looking forward to cultivate this interest into a potential research capability. And I am soon also going to Poland for a semester exchange, and I'm hoping to learn more and be more sensitive towards the issues that people are faced with out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria. Welcome, welcome. Next on my screen is Professor David Patterson, who's a friend, a colleague, and a mentor. So David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, I'm David Patterson. I hold the Feinberg Chair in Holocaust Studies at the University of Texas at Dallas. I have the great honor and blessing to work with Charles on a number of projects, and I serve on the Academic Steering Committee for ISGAP. Tomorrow, I'll be speaking about connections between Nazi anti-Semitism and jihadist anti-Semitism, lines of development and influence, which is something I've worked on. I'm currently researching a project on what I call morally required anti-Semitism. So I look forward to learning with all of you and learning from you. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Next on the screen, I see Sami Eppel. Sami.
Yes, thank you, Charles. I was supposed to be with you in Oxford. I couldn't make it because of a family health situation, which is being resolved. I am an engineer and a journalist, and I'm from Venezuela, which is for the first time in recent history, we had government-sponsored anti-Semitism in a Western country, and that made me join ISGAP about 11 years ago, and other Jewish organizations to fight anti-Semitism. And I do that working a lot with evangelicals in many countries in Latin America. And I'm very glad I can join you all. Hope to learn a language that I can continue to use to get more friends in Latin America, like Natan Sharansky, with the first time that he had the Global Forum to Combat Anti-Semitism in Jerusalem. That's the mandate that he gave many of us. He said, go out and find allies. That's what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. Welcome. Sorry you couldn't be here, but at least you're here virtually. Nice to see you. The next person I see is Dr. Abu Salah Sakender. Abu Salah, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm working as assistant professor of Jagannath University, Dhaka, Bangladesh. I'm from Dhaka, Bangladesh as well. I'm a scholar of comparative history and comparative religion. So I would like to know more about anti-Semitism studies, why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome. The next person I see on the screen is Sirajan Rawlings Kamara. The floor is yours, sir. Sorry, you're muted.
Okay. Yes, I am Honorable Sirajul Kamara, a one-time member of parliament and presently the president of Sierra Leone Israel Connection and the national coordinator of Africa-Israel Initiative. I've been a voice for Israel in West Africa since 2005, and I just hate what people do against Israel, so I decided to take a platform to speak for Israel. I'm also an itinerant lecturer in some of the colleges local here, where I speak on and about Israel and also do television programs twice every month on Middle East politics, of course, with the aim of promoting and for people to know more about Israel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here virtually. I know you've been trying for years to come in person.
Yeah.
So this is, I guess, the next best thing. So welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks. The next person is a friend and colleague at ISGAP, Chris Gassenschmidt. Chris.
How are you doing, Charles?
I'm well. Nice to see you.
Greetings from Antonian to Antonian. Let's say I'm German myself. I'm born in Germany, but I live and work since 25 years in Athens, Greece. And I'm actually an expert on, let's say, Jewish life in Tsarist Russia. But my German heritage, let's say, forced me to get into the studies of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. And in the fall semester, I'm teaching the course that came out of the 2015 Summer Institute for the third time. And I'm going to run again an ISGAP lecture series. Charles, I sent you the list of lecturers and the topics. I got some really good people. Some are also ISGAP research fellows. And I hope I get one or two more. And then we're going to run the third, let's say, series. And I guarantee you it's going to be a great success.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. Nice that you're here. Good
No
to see you.
problem.
Good to see you. Next on the screen, I see Ruben Zeman. Ruben.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. My name is Ruben Zeman. I'm a history and philosophy graduate from the Netherlands. I study mostly anti-Semitism in modern and contemporary history in Central and Eastern Europe. Therefore, it is a great honor to be here and to be invited. And additionally, I share what Dean Professor Cohen, I think, just said, that I often feel myself in need of a vocabulary to speak about anti-Semitism with students and also with lecturers in university. So thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. Welcome. Next, I see Yitzhak Moore. Yitzhak.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for having me. I'm from Jerusalem, Israel. I am a PhD student at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. My research examined the relationship between Jews and Christians in the United States in recent decades, and the spectrum of Christian beliefs ranging from philo-Semitism to anti-Semitism underlying this relationship. And I'm here to study from the expert and out of understanding that the versions of negative attitude toward Jews today are more complex and sophisticated than in the past. So I have to enrich my understanding of anti-Semitism.
Great. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. The next person I see is the Professor Larry Amsel. Larry, are you there?
I'm here, but because of a Wi-Fi thing, I've got a photograph up instead of a video up. Can I be here? Can you people hear me?
We hear you well.
Yeah, I'm also much better looking in the photograph than I am in real life, so that helps. So I'm a research psychiatrist at Columbia University. And my field of research is in trauma, and especially in mass trauma, the effects of mass trauma on children over the lifetime. And I'm a child of Holocaust survivors as well, which may have something to do with my choice of what I study. And I'm also very, very interested in how generations and generations of anti-Semitism have been internalized as trauma within the Jewish psyche, and how that affects Jewish either participation in Zionism, or even in some paradoxical fashions turns Jews against their own history. So I'm very interested in that kind of research. The psychology of anti-Semitism would sum it up, and I'm very, very happy to participate in this, and thank you for organizing it.
Thanks, Larry. Good to hear you. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. The next person I see is Cordero Shaw. Mr. Shaw.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cordero Shaw. I'm a Michigan native. I'm a recent graduate of Yale. I pursued my Master's of Arts in Religion and the Social Sciences there. And I'm here simply to learn more about anti-Semitism. Also, please do excuse my camera not being on. I'm also experiencing connectivity issues. Yeah, thank you all so much for inviting me to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. Pedro Gonzalez, you're next. Pedro.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Pedro Gonzalez Corona. I'm a human rights educator. I think I'm having also some issues with the camera, so my apologies. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
All right. This year I'm going to be part of a new cohort of postdoctoral fellows at Columbia University. I was in charge of the seminar in Latin American anti-Semitism throughout winter and spring of 2021. I mean, winter 2020. I was a fellow in 2018 at the ISGAP Summer Institute, and as a result of that, I developed a syllabus. And I was lucky enough to be able to teach it twice in 2 years at UTD. So I'm happy to be here with you. I'm looking forward to meeting you and learning with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. I'm glad you're here, and thank you for all your efforts with it. And it was an amazing seminar series, and we're honored to have you as part of our team. So thank you. The next person I see is Jessica Imami. Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Imami. I'm a professor of sociology, adjunct professor of sociology at Marymount University. And I'm on my third career. I graduated in 2018, but I have noticed as an adjunct professor and as somebody who specialized in immigration studies that immigration studies in the United States is very provincial. It focuses mostly around race and ethnicity in a sort of a hierarchical post-colonial system that does not agree with my experience or with what I went through in the Middle East. I was in the Iranian Revolution during childhood. So this semester, to challenge my students, I gave them a book about a privileged bicultural Iranian Jewish woman who was stuck in the revolution. And I could see them struggling because her plight did not coincide with anything they had learned in high school, in junior high school, especially the status of women. And the only place I found where anything that coincides with reality was in anti-Semitism studies. The way women are treated in the Middle East is dismissed, and also anti-Semitism that's post-colonial is dismissed in today's immigration scholarship. So I'm now becoming a Iranian anti-Semitism scholar, and I'm pleased to be here for the second year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm glad you came back. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Cool. It's an honor for us. Thank you. So the next person I see is Yehudit Barsky. Yudit Barsky. Sorry, Yudit. The floor is yours. Yudit, are you there? Okay, I think her, okay, we'll come back to her. The next person I see is Max Story.
Hello, everybody. My name is Max Story. I'm from Manchester in England. I've just finished my undergraduate degree from the University of Liverpool, Liverpool John Moores, in history. And I'm just about to start an MA in history at the University of Manchester. I'm just here because I want to sharpen up my tools a little bit better academically for an academic career, focusing on like history of anti-Semitism, stuff like that. So yeah, thank you.
Welcome, Max. We're happy you're here. Thank you. The next person is Matthew Hone. Matthew.
Oh, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And I would like to thank Dr. Pedro Gonzalez and Dr. David Patterson for encouraging me to attend ISGAP. And I would just wish I were there in person. I'm an adjunct professor at Stockton University, where I teach classes in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And some of the research and my interests are ethnic conflict and anti-Semitism in the ex-Yugoslavia, as well as Holocaust denial and distortion in Eastern Europe. And I hope to learn a lot, especially other sources of anti-Semitism, which I don't know as much about. And I hope this experience will enrich me as a person and as a professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome. Welcome. James Nemiroff. James.
Thank you very much. My name is James Nemiroff, and I am currently a faculty member in the Spanish department at Kalamazoo College. I'd like to thank my colleague, Dr. Amy Ellman, for encouraging me to attend this wonderful seminar. The reason I'm here is that my research interests pertain to the representations of Judaism in early modern Spain, and I've taught a course at Kalamazoo College that linked together early modern representations of Judaism and contemporary anti-Semitism. And the main goal was to make anti-Semitism digestible for undergraduate students, as other colleagues have mentioned. And so the goal of the seminar for me is to expand on that course. It's particularly the contemporary anti-Semitism angle, and to share different ideas regarding how to teach anti-Semitism. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. The next person I see is Catherine Herbard. Catherine, the floor is yours. Welcome back.
Thank you, Charles. I'm Catherine Harwood. I'm a senior lecturer in politics in the history department at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK. I'm really disappointed not to be able to be with you in Oxford. I'm really gutted about that, but thank you so much to Ira. Special shout out there for all your help and support trying to get things sorted. I'm just really pleased to have the opportunity to come back and meet some new people, learn some new things, and engage on these really important topics.
Thank you. Welcome, Catherine. Welcome back. And I see Kane. Kane, you're next.
Hi, I'm Kane from Liverpool in the UK. I've just finished my undergraduate study at Liverpool John Moores University, where I took quite a particular interest in Islamic anti-Semitism, and particularly like Iranian anti-Semitism. And I'm starting a master's in history at the University of Manchester in September, where I'm hoping to explore this research more, and I'm hoping to learn stuff from this summer institute that I can take into that master's and maybe research.
Cool. So welcome. Glad you're here. Next is Helena Rimon. Helena. Helena, sorry, you're muted.
Yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm Helena Rimon. I live in Jerusalem in Israel. I immigrated to Israel from the former Soviet Union in 1987. And now I teach Hebrew literature in the Israeli Heritage Department in the University of Ariel. I published a number of books and articles in English and in Russian and in Hebrew, mostly about comparative literature. But why I'm here? Because for me, anti-Semitism has never been a subject of academic interest. It was something that I grew up with, and now I witness a rather unpredictable phenomenon in Israel, and this is hostility, hatred, and sometimes even discrimination to religious Jews and the Jewish religion by the new immigrants from the former Soviet Union. In the electronic media, Dr. Barnett is here, Reject of Anti-Semitism case. And I'm here because I feel that I have to learn this thing. I have to get the tools to study it and to fight with it.
Welcome, Elena. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. The next person is Noreen Rahim.
Thank you so much. My name is Noreen Rahim, and I'm glad to see you all here. I'm from Bangladesh. I basically work at the Liberation War Museum. It has a center for the study of genocide and justice, where I'm working as a coordinator. And along with that, I'm also teaching at a private university in Bangladesh as well. And my involvement with ISGAP was a few months back when I spoke about the secularism and anti-Semitism in Bangladesh in its webinar series on South Asia. And from there, actually, I got interested. And it's a very interesting fact that Bangladesh has suffered a genocide 50 years back. And at the same time, Bangladesh is the country which doesn't allow strictly prohibits its citizens to go to Israel. So it's a very interesting area to do my research. So I'm looking forward to learn more from this training. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us. I know it must be late there, so, so welcome. The next person is Luisa Klebnikova. Oh, sorry for pronouncing your name, from Moscow, and you're welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Luisa Klebnikova. I'm a PhD in history. I work as an associate professor at the Department for Jewish Studies at Lomonosov Moscow University. I teach students history of Israel and Zionism. I'm very much thankful to Professor Arkady Koverman. He's my boss at our department for, and also my best friend, for encouraged me to apply for this program. And I'm really glad that I'm here with all of you. I'm excited to learn more and to share it with my students and my colleagues here in our university. So thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Welcome. The next person is Risa Levitt. Risa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Risa. I am a professor at San Diego State University, where I also chair the Department for the Study of Religion, and I direct the Jewish Studies program. My area of expertise is actually ancient Israel and Jewish and Christian origins, so this is definitely a bit of a stretch for me. But as my colleague David Klein mentioned, we have a bit of a crisis on our university campus, and in fact, I think in California as a whole. So we've been tasked with developing a course to address the issue of anti-Semitism. Surprisingly, there isn't a single class in our curriculum that does that at the moment. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you on that.
Thank you, Risa. Thanks for being here. And amazingly, as you'll see, your university is not unique. I think there's really a blind spot or a vacuum in academia on dealing with contemporary anti-Semitism, and these programs are dedicated to trying to fill the gap in our education system. So welcome. The next person here on our screen and also with us here in Pembroke College is Diane Martin. Diane.
Hi, does everyone hear me?
Can you hear Diane? Yeah, yes.
Okay, hi, I'm Diane Martin. I am an assistant professor of English at Wheaton College in Illinois. I just initiated a course on Holocaust literature at that college. I'm excited that I did because I was surprised at some of the responses I received from students, which made this institute so relevant, and I'm so thrilled to be here because we're harnessing the data and the information and vocabulary that I need to help my students to steer them back into truth. I found that some of my students during the Holocaust literature course, they were parroting anti-Semitic discourse that they had picked up in other classes, and that was shocking to me. So I'm really, really excited about being here. I've already learned so much just from the reading, so I can't wait to hear all the lectures this week. Even though my doctoral work was in languages and literature, my master's work was in teaching Holocaust literature, and so I've always had this vested interest in that area.
So welcome to the virtual program and the in-person program. So thanks for being here. The next person I see is Dr. Rami Aziz from Ottawa. Rami.
Yeah, hello everybody. It's my pleasure and very honored to be here today at ISGAP Summer School. My relation with ISGAP has been started a few years ago as a student attending ISGAP Summer School before Corona, so I was lucky to attend in person during my PhD program, and after that my relation has been developed with ISGAP and anti-Semitism as I studied about political Islam, and part from studying about political Islam is the Islamist behavior and how they use anti-Semitism to promote their agenda and attract the young people towards them. So now currently I'm working for the second year as a ISGAP research fellow in Middle East and Arab Affairs. And for first time last year, we ran a program and a series of seminars in Arabic language about anti-Semitism. ISGAP Summer School for the first time, ISGAP Summer Seminars series for first time being in Arabic language. And we are heading to have a second series of seminars in the fall. Tomorrow I will be with you along with a great professor Bennie and user Rabbi to speaking about the link between Palestinian cause and what so-called Palestinian cause and promoting anti-Semitism. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Rami. Good to see you. Welcome. I think the last person I see here is Joan O'Callaghan. Joan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charles. Hello, everybody. I'm here from OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education of the University of Toronto. In spite of my virtual background, I am sitting in central Toronto. My subject area is English language and literature, curriculum and instruction, and I'll be speaking to you shortly a little more on that. And let me just say that I am really thrilled to be here.
Okay, thank you, Joan. So welcome. Okay, thank you. And so I think I've introduced everybody. Is there anybody that somehow I missed? I don't want to miss anybody. Everybody said hello. Oh, I see Philip Barber didn't say hello. So Philip, sorry, the floor is yours.
Hello, I was going to try and sneak out of that one, but no, I appreciate it. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this Summer Institute, if only virtually. I'm a PhD candidate and research assistant with the Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies at the University of Texas at Dallas. And before beginning my PhD work there, I was a public educator for a number of years in Texas public schools, at which I had opportunities. Fortunately, my principal was in agreement with me teaching lessons about the Holocaust as an English literature teacher. And so combining those two interests in education and anti-Semitism and Holocaust studies, I'm very much looking forward to learning from each of you during this week.
Great. Thank you, Philip. Thank you for being here. And is there anybody else that I didn't miss potentially? Everybody was able to say hello? Okay, so welcome to the Summer Institute. Thanks for introducing yourselves, and I'm glad everybody's here. You will have opportunities to participate in the Q&A. Sorry, the battery's running low. You have to turn on the electricity in the floor. Yeah. So everybody will have opportunities to ask questions during the lectures. We'll have a Q&A period after each lecture. And you're also going to be broken into groups where there'll be one of our colleagues at ISGAP, one of our scholars will also help you to kind of debrief the day, and you'll be able to kind of have tutorials recapping the day and focusing on your work to create course curriculum to bring back to your home university. Okay, okay, yeah. Okay, so is Akiva coming?
Yeah, I think he should be.
Okay, so can everybody hear me? Oh, the screen is flashing. Okay. So this evening we're going to have 3 lectures as part of the opening session. Joan O'Callaghan will be speaking, I will be speaking, and the first lecture will be from one of my teachers and rabbis, Akiva Zweig, and I think he's on or no? He's coming on.
Give a few more minutes for him. He should be on soon.
Okay. All right, so what I'll do in the interim is introduce to you Akiva. I'll read from his biography. So Akiva is a Rosh Yeshiva. He's the head of Yeshiva, or a Jewish place of higher learning in Miami Beach. And I think in part, as David Patterson will attest, one of the reasons why each year that we begin the Summer Institute with a rabbi speaking about Jewish thought and Jewish perspectives and Jewish ethics is because, in a sense, I think that anti-Semitism is not only genocidal in its nature, and we'll explore that in great detail during the week, but there's something, I think, at a metaphysical level, I think by murdering Jews and alienating, marginalizing Jews, it's also at some level, at a metaphysical level, I think it's sort of an attempt to kill the word of God, to kill the people who have a covenant with God that go back thousands of years. And in a sense, the legacy of Judaism and the Jewish people is bringing monotheism and ethics to the world. So I think you can sort of trace some of the social movements that have existed over the millennium. It's not just about killing the Jews, it's about killing Judaism and perhaps even killing God. So that's at a more abstract level. And I think, in a sense, we're going to be dealing with a world. He said, so Akiva will be here in 20 minutes. I'll continue the introduction and then maybe we'll go to Joan. So I think in a sense that the study of anti-Semitism is about studying a world of lies, of hate, of bigotry, of dehumanization, objectifying human beings and taking away their individuality and taking away the fact that all people are created in the image of God. And in a sense, what I think the importance of Akiva being here, or Rabbi Zweig, is sort of injecting, in a sense, a opening lecture on Jewish thought and on Jewish ethics. And in a sense, I think we really have to demarcate between Jewish wisdom, knowledge, culture, heritage, from anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is really kind of assessing, in an interdisciplinary context, a form of hate. A hate, by the way, that I think affects all people. As Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize winner and a very powerful witness to the Holocaust, he always taught that anti-Semitism begins with Jewish people, but it never ends with Jewish people. Once this form of hatred is unleashed upon society, it knows no boundaries. And if you don't even have to be an expert of history to know that in societies where anti-Semitism ran rampant, that very often other groups in that society or the very fabric of the society would implode. That once you begin to hate Jews, other groups are also vulnerable. The very nature, the institutions of our society, institutions and practices and values that hold respect for each citizen, once this form of hatred is unleashed, it dissipates and often ends in a disaster, not just for the Jewish people, but for others as well. So this is a human rights issue. So I think Akiva will speak on that. However, I just received word that Akiva is going to be a bit late, so he won't be the opening lecture of this event, so we don't have to waste time. I'm going to introduce our second speaker. I'm going to be the third speaker, by the way. So I'm going to ask Joan if she can speak first. Joan is an expert on education and pedagogy, and I think pedagogy, the fact that many of the professors are here trying to create new courses and new curriculum, I think Joan's role in the Summer Institute will be very important because she's an expert and a scholar on education and pedagogy, and she'll be available for you to confer with her during the week. So Joan is from Toronto. She graduated from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. She studied English literature, and then she attended University of Western Ontario. She studied English literature. She then went on to York University in Toronto, where she did an MA in English and a Bachelor's of Education at York, and also from the University of Toronto. She's been a lecturer at Queen's University and is currently a lecturer at the University of Toronto at OISE. It's a premier education institute in Canada, the Institute for the Studies of Education. She was the recipient of the the Golden Apple Award from Queen's University for Education Excellence in Teaching, and was named the Professor of the Year by the Students' Council. She's won many awards for her teaching. Joan has had an active career in freelance writing and has over 30 publications to her credit. She's the author of 3 books, 2 published by Scholastic Canada and the other by Rubicon or Harcourt Publishers. She has written short stories. 2 have won national competitions and has been published in several anthologies. She's published articles in numerous newspapers, both in Canada and internationally, and is a frequent workshop publisher. Joan served on the board of governors of the Toronto-based Mackenzie Institute for the Study of Terrorism, Revolution, and Propaganda, and is a member and vice chair since 2008 to 2020. She's a member and vice chair. And Joan is also an ISGAP fellow. And also Joan played a very key role, which is not on her resume, in creating curriculum on issues of anti-Semitism that is being used throughout Canada by hundreds of thousands of students. So Joan, it's an honor for us to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charles. Let me say thank you to you and also to Ira for inviting me to speak today. I am truly honored to be here.
Joan, you just muted.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Okay, let me start again. So, okay, can you hear me now? Yes, I hope so. Okay, so thank you again, Charles, and thank you, Ira, for inviting me to speak to you. I am indeed truly honored to be here, and especially having heard so many bios of so many eminent presenters and participants. I've been asked to address the subject of curriculum. This is a huge topic, and indeed one could offer a whole course based on it. Wait a minute, let me try this again. One could offer a whole course based on it. I'm going to touch on a few principles that educators need to think about, and I will be available for the duration of the conference, as Charles has told you, if anyone would like to pursue this further. Around the 3rd century BC, a Confucian philosopher named Qi said, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn." Not much has changed since then. Here is a more recent adaptation of Key's words. Wait a minute. When I hear it, I forget. Teach me, sorry. When I see it, I remember it. And when I do it, I know it. This is in fact borne out by research. A study by Hartley and Davies in 1986 found that after the first 10 minutes of a 50 to 60-minute lecture, students retain 70% of what they hear. However, they could recall only 20% of the last 10 minutes of the lecture. PowerPoint is only marginally more effective. Studies show that PowerPoint positively affects student attitudes towards the instructor and the material, but researchers have not been able to document any improvement in retention. So what do we do? Our friend from the 3rd century, Key, suggests the answer. We need to find ways to involve or engage students with the courses we teach, intellectually, emotionally, and even physically.
Joan,
sorry?
Just are you trying to put slides on the screen right now? I wasn't
Can
sure.
you not see them?
No, nothing's sharing right now. So if you want, we can pull it up.
I thought we were doing, yeah, I thought we had screen share going.
No, not yet. Daphne, do you want to pull it up for us?
Yeah, I'll pull them up. Okay, do you want me to, okay. Okay, where would you like me? Do you want me to stay where I am or should I go back?
I think you could we can just get up to speed where you are. Just let us know when we should.
I can just take you quickly through where I was and I'll stop where I was.
Sure.
And there we go. There we go. And I think this is where I was at. Yeah, PowerPoint is only marginally more effective, and that studies show that, yeah, PowerPoint positively affects student attitudes towards the instructor and the material, but they have not been able to document that any improvement in student retention. So what do we do? Our friend from the 3rd century, Key, suggests the answer. We need to find ways to involve or engage students with the courses that we teach, intellectually, emotionally, and even physically. And in order for curriculum delivery to be successful, students need to engage with it. Student engagement is what drives my own planning and my own teaching. When we consider curriculum, we need to bear in mind that there are 4 different kinds: the intended or the official curriculum, the taught curriculum, the unintended curriculum, and the learned curriculum. The intended or official curriculum is what we're focusing on today, but it is important to understand what the other 3 are and how they can impact our work. The intended or official curriculum is the course syllabus, the document that we design and share with students, administration, and other faculty. The taught curriculum is what we actually teach, and it can differ from the intended or official curriculum in different ways and for different reasons. This might include the nature of the class, what the students already know coming into your course, or conversely, do not know, time allotment, the class's priorities, and your priorities. The unintended curriculum is what we transmit, often without realizing it. Elements of the unintended curriculum might include our values, personality quirks, preferences or priorities, lifestyle, and ethics. How we speak, how we dress, how we interact with students. For example, calling more often on males than females, or vice versa, and how in general we present ourselves are all part of the unintended curriculum. Other influences might include what students learn in other classes, the culture of the institution, and what they get from their peer group. As instructors, we need to be aware of the messages we send along with the formal curriculum. The learned curriculum is what students actually take away from our courses, and this may vary from student to student and be different from what we expected. There are many reasons for this, and it is one of those things that as educators, it behooves us to be aware of. So in dealing with the intended or the official curriculum, there are areas that need to be considered when determining goals or outcomes. Knowledge. What do we want students to know by the end of our course? Skills. What do we want students to be able to do? Affect. How do we want students to think or feel? All of these outcomes are present to a greater or lesser extent, depending on our priorities. So when we design curriculum, we begin by articulating our expectations or intended outcomes for the students. In order to achieve these outcomes, what knowledge, skills, and affect are needed? What content? What methods for delivering the curriculum? What assessment strategies? How will you know that students have achieved these outcomes? It's usually a good idea to find out what our students already know, can or cannot do, or think or feel about the subject matter before we begin, as this will inform our teaching. This is what we call diagnostic assessment, and I'll say a bit more about that shortly. The information we glean brings the taught curriculum and the curriculum delivery into play. What areas of the syllabus will we need to focus on? What are the best methods for achieving the desired outcomes? We have already discussed the limitations of lecture and PowerPoint. And I'd like to say just a few words about assessment. Assessment should always relate directly to your stated outcomes or expectations. There are three kinds of assessment. The first is diagnostic. I alluded to this a few moments ago. What do students already know? What can they already do? How do they think or feel about the subject? Discovering these things need not be difficult or time-consuming. The important thing is to acquire a snapshot, as it were, of where your students are at. The second type is informal assessment. This is best described as, how are we doing? Are they learning what I want them to learn? If the students are not learning or developing as you'd hoped, it is usually an indicator that you need to modify the materials that you're using or your teaching methods. Acquiring this information too need not be difficult or time-consuming. And finally, there is formal assessment. This is the paper, project, or presentation that is a forum for students to show what they have learned, and that is submitted for purposes of assigning a mark or a grade. At this point, it is time for you as instructors to consider your own individual circumstances. Do you see places in your courses where you can foster greater student engagement? And if anyone would like to discuss any of these ideas further, as I said before, I will be available throughout the conference, and I am more than happy to talk with you. I thank you for your attention.
So you can just unmute Charles.
Joan, thank you very much. So Joan will be with us. She's a scholar of pedagogy and education. And as we develop course curriculum, we'll be providing materials for you. You'll have experts on various facets of anti-Semitism throughout the week. And as we develop the courses together, she'll be a very important resource to you to ask any questions as you construct your syllabi. So Akiva is going to be here in 4 minutes. So what I suggest, we've been at it for about 90 minutes. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? We'll come back at 6:30 UK time. That's 1:30 New York time, 8:30, it's fine, 8:30 Israel time. So everybody, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll wait for Akiva. Thank you.
Charles, I'm on.
Okay, so we'll just take a break and we'll come back in 5 minutes.
No problem.
Good boy.
Ira, may I ask a question?
Yeah, fire away.
Are we are we finished with the reading group, the ISGAP reading group? Because let's say last week we didn't meet, the week before we didn't meet, and it seems, you know, it's a summer break. I just want to know. That's all.
Yeah, I think it's just more of a summer hiatus, but
I mean, like I
Okay.
don't think. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna start. So Akiva, are you with us? Hope everybody is.
Yes, I am.
Hi, Akiva. Okay, welcome. I gave everybody a short
Hello.
introduction about you and the importance of your lecture. So again, Rabbi Akiva Zweig has studied and lectured over 30 years at the Talmudic College of Florida in Miami. He studied several years abroad in Near Israel Rabbinical College in Baltimore, and is the Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva or Talmudic College in Florida. Rabbi Zweig is also a teacher and mentor to me, and I think his work and his lectures are very important. And again, Akiva, we were saying earlier, at a metaphysical level, I think anti-Semitism takes place in the world of lies. It's an attempt not only to harm and destroy the Jewish people, but perhaps at some level as well, it's an attempt to destroy God or the Word of God. So Akiva, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with the scholars of Oxford. I think this is my 5th year doing this lecture, and I want to just mention that I have great esteem and admiration for Dr. Small, for the team of ISGAP, Ira Guberman, Dennis Bennie, the board of directors, and I just want to acknowledge to everyone that I learn as much as I teach from my teaching. So what I would love is anybody's comments and questions afterwards. I hope that we'll be able to have time to discuss them. And I look forward to the conversation more than to my delivering the speech. In general, I was fascinated to learn that the motto of the University of Oxford is Dominus Illuminatio Mea, or the Lord is my light. I learned this several years ago, and I was fascinated by this credo because it's not only a mantra, it's also a mission statement. So interestingly, I believe that this motto is very relevant to our discussion regarding anti-Semitism and its deepest origins. So as Charles mentioned, I have education as my background, teaching for many years. My father is a well-known scholar in the world of Judaism, and I feel very passionate about the study of anti-Semitism in the world of academia. The organization ISGAP is doing tremendously important work and deserves our respect and attention. And specifically, ISGAP is one of the few organizations that was ahead of the curve when it came to anti-Semitism, because ISGAP is not reacting to acts of anti-Semitism. ISGAP is exploring the roots of anti-Semitism, and therefore it's able to be proactively sought out and dealt with at its very deepest levels. If you look at the Oxford English Dictionary definition of the word Semite, you will find that a Semite is a member of any of the peoples who speak or spoke a Semitic language, including in particular Jews and Arabs. The Merriam-Webster dictionary specifically mentions any of a number of peoples of Southwestern Asia. These include Akkadians, Phoenicians, Hebrews, and Arabs. But incredibly, if you look at the same Oxford dictionary, at the definition of anti-Semitism, you find that anti-Semitism refers specifically to hostility or discrimination against Jews as a religious, ethnic, or racial group to the exclusion of all other Semites. So how do we explain this phenomenon? On the one hand, a Semite is any member of many different peoples, and on the other hand, being an anti-Semite is having a specifically anti-Jewish agenda. So I would like to call everyone's attention again to an etymological piece of information, also courtesy of the Oxford English Dictionary. The dictionary says that the origin of the word Semite is based on the biblical character who was a son of Noah. Noah had 3 sons, and one of them was named Shem, and Semite derives from this son of Noah named Shem. Now, Noah himself is famous for having survived the flood. I think it's been a number of movies already that covered the entire world on an ark that God instructed him to build. The Bible records that one of the 3 sons that was on that ark was Shem. So we now know that the word Semite derives from the Hebrew name Shem, who was a son of Noah. I would now like to share with you some classical biblical teachings and expositions in traditional Jewish thinking. These pieces of information are based on the 5 books of Moses and have been in existence for over 3 millenniums. Now, I'm always personally blown away by the wisdom of the Jewish tradition because it's been around for so long and it seems just timeless and always relevant. So this man named Shem, the son of Noah, is the ancestor of all the Semitic nations, all those nations that we mentioned before, including the Jews, the Arabs, the Phoenicians, the Akkadians, etc. These all descend from this man named Shem. So, of course, it includes what today we call the Jews, the Islamic people, and quite possibly, it seems, large numbers of Christians as well. Certainly, the thinking of all these Semitic peoples and their respective religions share the powerful influence of the Abrahamic tradition, who himself, Abraham himself, was a descendant of Shem. Now, according to all classic Jewish literature, this man Shem established the first known university. It was titled simply the Yeshiva of Shem, or the University of Shem. Further, it is recorded in ancient Jewish texts that some of the students who studied in this university included many peoples of the world, among them Abraham himself and several of his descendants. So the question is, what was Shem teaching? What was taught and studied in this first ancient university? And the answer is the universal laws of mankind and society. These laws were given by God directly to the first man, Adam, and then later again to Noah. These laws describe the basic parameters of a society that recognizes the one God as the creator of the universe and king of all mankind. In brief, these laws ban the worship of idols, promote morality, as well as the adjudication of civil laws and rights, including the prohibited acts of murder, stealing, and adultery. In Judaism, these laws are known simply as the Noahide laws. These are called the Noahide laws because after the deluge, after the flood, Noah and all his descendants were instructed by God as to their observance. Now, a centerpiece of these laws is the concept that all mankind is created in God's image. It's written that way in the Bible. This means that there is a reflection of God that is innate to every human being, and that every human being has godly value. It is because of this godliness that murder is abhorrent. It is this godliness that uniquely dignifies all humanity. What I wish to highlight about these laws of morality and adjudication is the following. According to Judaism and Jewish law, Jewish thinking, these laws are universal. Every single human being on the planet is subject to these same rules and ethics. Moreover, these are the only universal laws. This concept that these are the only rules cannot be overemphasized. This exclusivity necessarily means that the only requirement by God to live an authentic, God-ordained and God-condoned existence is to abide by this set of rules. The significance of this uniquely Jewish teaching is that all human beings have these same regulations, and all human beings are the subjects of one God, and all human beings are in God's image. So therefore, all human beings must recognize the rights of the other's existence and all must adhere to these rules to this same God. This genuine Jewish view of all humanity is that no human being has the right to thrust any rule or any dictum on any other human being except for these laws. These are the only laws. This means that the entirety of humanity should have global views of complete tolerance for each other, right? Because everybody is created in God's image, and respect for each other, because everybody is created in God's image, except in violation of these laws. That's it. So under this definition, it would be illegal to kill or discriminate against anyone for race, color, or culture. The only guidelines are these rules. So I suggest to all of us sitting here, wherever we are in the world, maybe some of us are in England, that this man Shem, the son of Noach, the original Semite, saw it as his mission to universally promulgate these ideas. Because he understood, this man Shem, he understood that the flooding of the world was due to man's pervasive corruption. He felt impassioned to prevent the decay of future societies. Shem therefore established this first university as a means of educating the entire world as to the existence of God and the application of these universal laws. Listen to how beautiful this is. He didn't go out and become a dictator, a monarch. He became a teacher to promulgate these truths. Indeed, the word university itself is derived from the word universe. The Oxford English Dictionary says that the Latin root of university means the whole or society. That's what universe means, university. This, of course, tells us that the role of university is to educate the whole society as to ways of thinking and paradigms, which is why universities are so important, why the work of ISGAP in the world of academia is so important. The result of all the above is that a Semite is a person who lives by and teaches these universal laws, ethics of morality, as well as this paradigm of monotheism. The Semite focuses on the godliness of every human being and the inherent respect due to every person. Therefore, anti-Semite or anti-Semitism is anything that contradicts or attacks these teachings. Let's explain this on a practical level. A Semite worldview is one where all people reflect godliness, have a right to exist, have a right to have a relationship with God, and a system whereby these rights are protected. Furthermore, the adherence to these universal laws and ethics is the basis of all societal behavior and will bring whatever present reward or benefit or long-term future existence that God will provide. Whether or not this current world lasts forever and whatever comes next, the whole of existence is meant for all people. According to the Semite, there is no special club or exclusivity that denies membership. The only requirement are these Noahide rules. This world is meant for every human, and any future existence or experience is meant for every human. To my knowledge, the only well-known and identifiable group that teaches this authentic Semitic view is the Jews. It is for this reason that anti-Semitism is defined as against the Jews, because they're the ones teaching the Semitic tradition that was started by the ancestor Shem. So what I mean by this is that the primary objection to the Semite is that the Semite does not agree that a relationship with God is exclusive. A Semite does not think that only one race or one type of person is superior. Only one type of person has godliness, or only one person controls others or dominates the world. That is not a Semitic view. An anti-Semite does subscribe to the notion that only one type of person, race, or religion is superior, and only one type of person has godliness, and therefore will have a relationship with God. An anti-Semite does think that one person or one race or one religion should, yes, dominate the world. Therefore, a root cause of anti-Semitism is resentment of the universal ideas espoused in Jewish educational thinking. As an aside, this is the fundamental reason that Jews do not seek to proselytize, to convert others. There is no Jewish notion that Jews need to save other humans. This is simply because all humanity can and should have their own unique relationship with God under the umbrella of the universal Noahide laws. Jews do not proselytize because there is no need to save others with Judaism, and because Jews do not have a mission to impose Judaism on humanity. As we all know from thousands of years of history of wars and suffering and violence among humans, so much is caused by notions of exclusivity, salvation, and superiority. So much bad is caused. Whether we look back to wars of religion versus pagan, or religious versus religious, or wars of global conquest, or the world wars, we almost always find notions of imposing exclusivity on a relationship with God, or superiority of race, or simply might is right. The concept of global domination because I'm more powerful. I contend that all of this actually is anti-Semitism. The Semite teaches respect for all men and their rights to exist, and for each person to have their own unique relationship with God and each other under the very broad umbrella of the Noahide principles. As we mentioned earlier, the word Semite derives from Shem, who was the son of Noah. Interestingly, this word Shem actually translates to mean name. In Hebrew, the word Shem means name. And in Orthodox Judaism especially, but other Jews as well, the common way to refer to God is Ha-Shem, or the name. That is the name, so to speak, for God, the name. This is seen as the most respectful of the informal ways to refer to God. So I believe that the reason this son of Noah was called Shem is because it was his mission to publicize the name of God. He established the first university whose purpose was to teach the universal Noahide laws and to educate the entire world as to the fact of the existence of God and his name. Now, just one last fascinating fact about this man named Shem is that the scripture tells us that Shem eventually became the king of Jerusalem and a minister of God. In light of this understanding, what we're talking about today, this is no mere coincidence. In Judaism, Jerusalem is the city of God's presence. And the truth is, it's not only Judaism. Even today, people from all over the world travel to Jerusalem to connect with spirituality and holiness. It makes perfect sense that the man who sought to educate the universe as to God's existence and name and to the universal laws of mankind would be the king of this city and a minister of God. So this concept of a university bringing teaching is, I believe, the motto of Oxford University, that the Lord is my light. This is actually a shining Semitic teaching. By stating that there is a God, by recognizing that God gives guidance, the University of Oxford has shaped itself in genuine Semitic tradition. Not only is the teaching Semitic, but it's a university that's promulgating it. So our hope is that by working together, we can help the world understand the truths of the universal laws of mankind and bring people to a genuine respect for each other and, God willing, eradicate anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and superiority and domination in the world. I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you, Akiva. Thank you very much for being here and your words of wisdom and teachings. Does anybody have any comments or questions that they would like to address to Rabbi Zweig? If you put up your hand, I can see it. So Christine, I see you first. Go ahead.
We can't hear you.
Has to be through Charles's computer. Here it comes.
Yeah, I really appreciated your explanations, particularly relating to the universality of laws. And, you know, it's an area which, in my own studies, I still haven't come to terms with an understanding from a sort of a Semite point of view. So I deeply appreciate what you've told us today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Christine. Are there any other comments or questions that somebody may have?
We have two hands up. Paula Marantz, you put your hand up first. So.
Okay, well, can I ask you how that very interesting analysis connects with the notion of the Jews as the chosen people, which I think is part of an anti-Semitic, what fuels anti-Semitism in some quarters, and the view of Jews as clannish and so forth, and self-contained, and not wanting to missionize because of that notion of being chosen. And the second point I wanted to ask you about is Jews are often associated with atheism, and that is also that propels a certain amount of anti-Semitism. I know in the American South, for example, to be an atheist is even, if one finds a group that's anti-Semitic, they're even more prejudiced against atheists,
I think
and they
you're
often will
muted.
conflate. Oh, am I
No,
muted?
I can hear. I can hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I heard Paula.
Okay, did you hear my whole thought?
Yeah, I understand your first question very well, and we'll get to that, but I don't understand your second point very well.
I guess because I don't know quite how to put this, and maybe it will come out later, but you're associating Jewishness with religion. It's an issue that I'm not exactly sure I agree with. I think you can be Jewish and not necessarily believe in God. And I think the idea of atheism and the prejudices that exist against atheism in some areas, particularly in the United States, can sometimes even be connected to Jews who are often seen as atheistic. So that may be too broad an issue for you to address, and I understand that. So perhaps just the first one and the issue of the chosen people.
Okay, well, first, yeah, we'll do that one. I'll try to touch on your second question at least a little bit as well, if I understand it correctly. We'll get to that in a moment. So your first question is an excellent question, and I've heard that question before, and it's terrific. It's one of the questions I look for as a response to this speech. And the answer that I understand in terms of what does it mean that the Jews are the chosen people, it really means that the Jews have been given an extra responsibility to make sure that the world knows that there are the universal laws and that nobody is superior. So that extra responsibility is actually a service requirement. So the example that I give sometimes is that the oldest child in a family very often sees themselves as being responsible to help take care of the rest of the family. And it is kind of the eldest and the firstborn responsibility. So we understand, and I personally understand, the concept of chosenness as a very serious responsibility to maintain the rest of the world and their understanding of the universal rights of mankind. So we were charged with that mission as Jews, which is a very difficult mission, to say the least. And I'm not saying, and please don't mishear me, I'm not saying that all Jews, buy into that, live up to that, do that, the rest of it. But that's my understanding. The theory of being chosen is about that. So it's not chosen to have rights, it's chosen to be responsible. Okay, so that's to the first question. Quite a number of years back, the way that one of Charles' friends put it was that the Jews are chosen to tell everyone that nobody is chosen. You could say it that way if you want. As far as your second question, not sure what I said to imply that in order to be Jewish, a person has to have religion or believe in God. And I certainly don't think that that's what makes a person Jewish. But I do think that that is part of the umbrella of the 7 laws of the Noahide laws, one of them not to have idols, right? So whether you call that religion or you call that an understanding of a God, that's something else, I think. I wasn't really getting into that, but it's definitely not my intention to say that a Jew is only someone who is religious or subscribes to God. Fair enough? Okay, excellent.
Great. Thank you. Daphne, can you see the next question? Because I don't see it on my
Yes, we have Sarajan and Risa. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are you hearing me? Hello.
Yeah, go
Yes.
ahead.
From the Oxford definition you quoted, you said that when it comes to Semitism, it involves Israel and other nations. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, it is only Israel. Is it possible to have something that will only focus about Israel instead of generalizing it, anti-Semitism, as if we are actually advocating for other tribes or nations? Is it possible at this time to say, to focus, do we have a term, could we have a term to focus only on Israel and about Israel?
I'm not sure I got the question. I'm sorry. Charles, maybe somebody can explain to me?
You can repeat the question, please.
Okay, the question is that from the dictionary definition, he talked about Semitism and meaning Israel and other nations. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, it is just about Israel. Is it possible to coin a phrase similar to anti-Semitism that will only focus on and about Israel instead of generalizing it in the sense of the Oxford Dictionary?
I think, you know what, Sarajan, I love that question. I understand your question now. And I think what you're asking, and just tell me if I get you correctly, I think what you're asking is maybe we need another term that is a better description of hatred towards Jews because anti-Semitism is too general. So can we come up with a word? Can we come up with a word that's more specific to Jews? And I want to tell you what I think is the profoundly Jewish answer to your question. No. Okay. And the reason is because hatred of all people is just masked by the hatred towards the idea that everybody's equal. So I actually think it's extremely accurate to call it anti-Semitism, even though we all know, wink, wink, the target is first going to be the Jews. And as Professor Small loves to quote Elie Wiesel, it starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. Because the real root is not about the Jews. It's against the notion of exactly what Shem was promoting. All people have rights, domination, superiority. All of that is baseless and should not exist.
Thank you.
That's what I think. That's really the responsibility of Jews, is to promote that for all people.
Thank you. Thank you. So the next question is from Risa and then Larry.
Hi, thanks. I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this correctly, but I'll give it a try. So as someone who teaches a Bible in a public university, I certainly understand the perspective from which you are interpreting and teaching the Bible, but that's certainly not the way I do it in my class, not because it's my personal belief, but just because I'm teaching in a public university. So with that in mind, some of the things that you're saying, I think would be very difficult to teach in that context. For example, the University of Shem, that's very much based on rabbinic interpretation. It's not, sitting there in the biblical text. So I'm struggling with kind of taking the things that you're saying, while I understand in the context of Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, would certainly make a whole lot of sense, to an audience that is not necessarily reading the Bible literally, that's trying to come at it from more of a historical critical perspective, and that's trying to understand the notions of Semitism, anti-Semitism, and chosenness in a less literal Orthodox context. If that made any sense, let me know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Your first name is Risa? Yeah, so Risa, I very much appreciate your question. Your question is, how do we explain this type of thinking as being founded on scripture, if in fact some of it is based on, let's call it, Orthodox rabbinic commentary or interpretation, right? That's how I'm understanding your question. Yes?
Right. I mean, honestly, even if it's based on scripture, in certain contexts, that's understood differently than perhaps in a yeshiva context.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate the fact that different people have different points of view. There's no question about that. And one of the things that I think is very important, that sometimes is nowadays getting lost in universities, is just because you have a different point of view doesn't mean I don't have my point of view, right? And so we have to be able to articulate the truth the way that we see it, and the way that we see it as both logical and credible, and why, and present that, rather than, pardon the word, bastardize the truth so that the audience is more comfortable. I don't say that we shouldn't try to bridge that gap. We definitely should. But I'm just putting that out there as a starting point. So when I learn and study with people that are not either Orthodox or even Jewish, I always start with, this is a way to understand the scripture. Now, you want to take it a different way, that's your business. I'm here to share with you my way and to listen to your way. As long as we offer that, I think we're doing a great job. So for the purposes of this lecture, you do not need to focus on shame as a university. All that really needs to be paid attention is the laws that were taught to Noah post the flood, and the fact that the rest of the world was never given a different set of laws. That's it. And now if you wanted more scriptural basis as to know, how we could prove some other points in the lecture, I'd be happy to do that, perhaps offline, right? But there is no question that what is compelling is, why is it anti-Semitism and not, anti-Judaism, right? And what is a Semite? Those are very compelling questions. And it is well-founded that a Semite is shame. And there are scriptural references to shame that bear a lot of attention. Even if you would not choose to approach it with the commentary of the rabbis, there's a lot to look at there. I could give you references if you want, and that would be a good, perhaps starting point of a conversation. I'm sure it's not completely satisfying, but I hope it helps.
And also, I'll just chime in a very brief comment. I also think that as you were speaking, the two of you were speaking with Risa, with your question, and Rabbi Zweig with your response. I'm also thinking of the work of Emmanuel Levinas, who brought Jewish thought and Jewish ethics to the university, perhaps for the first time. And I think in the last, say, post-Holocaust, post-World War II, in universities, there's been an opening up of trying to look at the wisdoms and culture of many groups around the world and incorporate it into curriculum, which I think is a very important step forward, because although Akiva speaks about the universality of Oxford and how it's rooted in the University of Shem and Jewish thought, We all know that Oxford and other Western universities were not open to non-Christians, non-Protestants, to women, to peoples from around the world, including Jews and many others. So the university is evolving, and I think hopefully our curriculum and education is evolving, where we could really look at the true wisdom of different cultures around the world. And I think that's this moment that we're living in. There's challenges with the woke culture, which we'll get into with the program, but there is an opportunity in 2021 to really engage different systems of knowledge and different cultural wisdoms and truth. And I think to exclude Jewish thought from the university requires to be challenged. But it's a long, complicated.
Professor Small, I just want to follow up on what you said. Two very interesting things. One is that my wife was born as a non-Jew. She was studying in University of Ireland and studied Emmanuel Levinas, and that began her path towards conversion before I ever met her. Right? That's just a proof, so to speak, to what Professor Small is saying. And the second thing is looking for other books that are contemporary is definitely helpful. And if you'd like, you're welcome to get my email address. I could reference some to you.
Okay, thanks, Akiva. So next is Larry, then I see Ruben and Victor. And then James.
Can I be heard? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's not very clear, but we hear you. Larry, you're muted. Larry, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you well.
I actually liked Risa's comment. I had a similar thought and a similar thought and similar question, and that is I have heard Rabbi Zweig speak before, and I think that he brings some very profound ideas regarding the nature of Jewish thought and the universalism of human rights, and I just wanted to make the point that while I think Dr. Zweig comes at this through a divine revelation perspective, the key messages of his do not depend on whether or not the sources of these Jewish thoughts were divine or human. The key insights can also be understood and appreciated by non-believers. So that was point one. And point two is, Rabbi Zweig always makes me think, and one of the things that it occurred to me was that the laws, as best as I know, correct me, there isn't a positive law to believe, there's a negative law not to believe falsely. In false idols.
Correct.
And isn't that fascinating, Rabbi Zweig, that there's no positive law to believe, just don't believe in false idols and false prophets. Can you explain that better to us?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I always appreciate your comments. I think you were the first one to ask the chosen question, as I recall. Laser, yes?
Well, you have a better memory than me.
I think so. So look, the phrasing is to not have other gods. So there is a strong implication of the one God. But the thing that I think is amazing, and really the point that you're bringing out, is that there isn't only one way to serve God. And that really validates different cultures and different ways of thinking, even for those people that subscribe to God, as a truth. And I think that's part of the message. That's part of the universality message. There isn't only one way or one people that serves God. There's many, many, many ways to serve God. Even within Judaism, even within Orthodox Judaism, there's many different paths, right? There are, yes, the absolute is that there is no other God. This is the always was, the source of everything. Okay. But in terms of what's the relationship, it's extremely broad. And I think that's very important. And we have to appreciate that because people are different and they reflect different great things about godliness and bring different lights to the world in their uniqueness, in the people's uniqueness.
Thank you. So we're actually over time. So what I would like to do, if it's all right, we'll continue. So Ruben and Victor, can I collect each of your question, and then Rabbi Zweig will respond. So Ruben, please, a concise question, and then Victor, a concise question.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Rabbi, for the very enlightening talk. I hope you can hear me. I think I'm having some, okay, very good. I will make the question very brief. Dr. Small already touched upon Levinas. I am very interested in this philosophical tradition that maybe starts with Maimonides and continues in the present with Rosenzweig, Buber, and Levinas. But what is interesting, I think, if we compare Buber and Levinas, and what is also interesting in your lecture, is that Levinas very much speaks about the universality between humans and among humans, while Buber tries to extend the universality also to the relation between humans and nature. And if I understood your lecture correctly, you speak about the universality of humans, saying that all humans are created in the image of God. But where does this leave other living beings, and where does this leave nature?
Okay, yeah, that's an excellent question. What is the Torah view on that? But go ahead, Dr. Small, go, please.
No, go ahead. It's a complicated question. Go ahead. We'll ask the next questions after.
Yeah, so the short answer is that my understanding of Judaism's view of nature is that the purpose of creation is man, but that doesn't mean that other things don't have rights or deserve respect. Right? So in other words, there's an ultimate goal that involves man, and that without man, that ultimate goal would not be fulfilled, meaning the goal of God creating. But at the same time, nature as a whole does need to be preserved and protected. And then you get into the complicated issues of, what exactly is an animal? What is the future? What is the right of man over animal? So the one very clear indicator in the Bible is that, number one, the only being that's created in the image of God is human being. That term never applies to anything else in nature. So that's very instructive. And the other is that permission is given to eat nature in two different places, including animals or fish, and actually many different places. So that permission is given. So those are some of the, the rough, principles that we get to look at in order to explore your question better. But at the same time, there are many laws of respecting nature and environment and things like that also in the Torah.
Thank you, Akiva. So the next question was Ruben, but now I don't see you on my screen. Ruben, go ahead.
Ruben just asked the question.
I'm sorry. Okay, so James, go ahead. And I'm missing the other person, sorry. Victor, you'll be next.
Okay.
So, okay.
First off, thank you, Dr. Small, and thank you, Rabbi, for an absolutely wonderful lecture. Just please let me know if this question doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to try to articulate it. So what I'm seeing here is in this notion of education through Shem is that Jews or educators are supposed to encourage a way of thinking by communicating a series of laws. So do rabbinic teachings or the Talmud encourage a particular kind of educational practice, or how we're supposed to teach these laws or encourage these ways of thinking? Just to expand on that point a little bit, because it says here that you say at one point that anti-Semitism, the root cause of anti-Semitism is a resentment towards a particular kind of Jewish educational thinking. So it's just a way of developing that point a little bit. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. One of the primary practices of Jewish teaching is that questions are more important than the answers. And that is, by definition, right? By its very definition, completely respecting the other. It's why, you know, the famous Passover night, you know, the Haggadah revolves around the 4 questions. Everything really in Judaism is about questions, and it's fascinating as to why. One reason is because we know that there are answers because God created everything, which by definition means it can make sense, as opposed to, well, it's random or just cannot make sense. Well, who says it makes sense, right? That's one reason. But the other is that the process of the human mind seeking truth is very important for the formation of society and the world. And that's one of the main practices of how teaching is supposed to happen. And if anybody ever studies Talmud, you'll see it's mostly questions, right? The conclusions are almost like a sidebar. So that's a major thing. And just in terms of promulgation to the world, in Jewish thinking, the idea is that Jews are supposed to become, you know, expert scholars and role models and be available to answer questions without necessarily proselytizing. That's really the model.
Thank you.
Thank you, Akiva. Victor.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your lecture. I just have a comment which can be interpreted as a question. So Rabbi Akiva's reflection implies the possibility of spelling the word antisemitism with a capital S, which is very provoking before the Jewish studies and Holocaust studies tradition that discards something called Semitism. Am I correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by the capital S. You mean like the nations? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, I was taught in Holocaust studies courses that we should not put a capital S in antisemitism, right? Because they say there is no Semitism. But with this interpretation, which I found very interesting, it looks like there is something like valuable in the word Semitism.
I would say, I think the answer is yes, if I'm understanding you correctly. Yes, there is value. I am promoting the idea that there is tremendous value in being a Semite, if we understand what it means. I agree. So thank you for that. Professor Small,
Okay,
we're good?
Thank you. We're good. Is there any other comments you'd like to make, Akiva, before we move on?
I just very much enjoyed all the questions, and I look forward to getting to know everyone somehow. Thank you for having me, Professor.
Akiva, I know you're very busy, so thank you very much for taking the time to impart your knowledge and wisdom.
I'm sorry, just one thing. If we look on the chat, Dr. Patterson posted something that was very profound. That was in response to one of the comments before. Anti-Semitism is not a form of racism. Racism is a form of anti-Semitism. That's a very well, phrased statement. Just wanted to mention that. Okay, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Akiva. Thank you, David, for your comment.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you for everything. Be well. Thank you. Okay, so we have about 40 minutes, and I'm going to give my talk, my welcoming address on issues of anti-Semitism. So the lecture now is entitled Globalization, Anti-Semitism, Race, and Israel Bashing. And I'm going to start off, first of all, I'm glad we've started the Summer Institute and welcome everybody to it. So as you know, the work of ISGAP, it's odd because I'm speaking to the camera, but there's people in the room, so it's a bit in-person and virtual. So the work of ISGAP is really to put the study of contemporary anti-Semitism on the academic map. And there is tremendous resistance to it, particularly in Western Europe and the Americas, North America in particular, and the United States. I think for decades, people looking at contemporary anti-Semitism, which includes examining right-wing populism and nationalism and left-wing extremism and political Islam, that often these sort of reactionary social movements conflate notions of Jewish peoplehood, Jewish communities outside of Israel, and of course, Israel and Zionism and the self-determination of the Jewish people, that once we begin to look at that issue as part of the different guises in which contemporary anti-Semitism manifests, that this is often dismissed as advocacy, of not scholarship, of being Zionist rather than being academically sound and being scientists, if you will. So there's been this resistance among so-called progressive, the progressive academic environment in which we function. So any connection between looking at the demonization of Israel as part of contemporary anti-Semitism is very difficult to sort of bring into the academic university setting. And this has been our struggle. When we started this program about 8 years ago, the Summer Institute, there were literally no courses at universities on issues of contemporary anti-Semitism. As staggering as that statement is, that was the case. There is Holocaust studies, there's the history of anti-Semitism, there's a history of anti-Semitism in various parts of the world, in social theory and social thought, but not in the contemporary context. And given the legacy of anti-Semitism in Western civilization, in Christianity, this is, as Robert Wistrich famously said, that anti-Semitism is the longest hatred, and the role of anti-Semitism and Jewish communities in Western thought, in Western society, during the Enlightenment, the profound contribution that Jews made to thought, but also the role that they played as the quintessential other in Europe as it expanded during the pre-colonial and colonial times is staggering. And this is an issue that is very difficult to frame in the academic context, and increasingly, I would argue, more difficult, particularly in the United States, as it starts to kind of, come under this wave of anti-Semitism. And this wave of anti-Semitism really begins in Europe 30, 40 years ago. It came to Canada probably 10 or 15 years ago, and now it's on the shores of the United States of America, in our best universities and in the halls of institutions of power. It's now being articulated even in policy as we speak. So I'm going to sort of give an overview of the challenges of contemporary anti-Semitism in the sort of age of globalization. And I think in the work that we do at ISGAP, one of the problems, and I think Professor Cohn articulated it well, we don't have a language. And I'm going to repeat this. We do not have a language to understand and assess contemporary anti-Semitism. And I think unlike centers that have sort of emerged on issues of race, of issues of gender, on even issues of queer studies in the decades and several decades, that there has been some advancement in understanding racism, sexism, homophobia, kind of in a conceptual framework. It's not just descriptive analysis, that we have frameworks to understand language, to understand the importance of economic, social, and cultural processes that impact on society, that impact on urban context, that impact on the fact how different segments of the population are treated, how they have access to goods and services, how they have access to employment, where they live and where they cannot live. We have a framework and a large body of knowledge now to draw on to understand the history, the legacy of sexism, of racism, and gendered identities. But we do not have that when it comes to contemporary anti-Semitism. The language of understanding, of mapping and decoding is in its infancy, of how to understand this, not just in the descriptive area, but to create a conceptual framework that takes into consideration economic, social, and cultural processes that impact on anti-Semitism. So those of you who are taking this course, I'm sure you're all aware of the explosion of anti-Semitism in the last several decades. I think in the United States and in the West, during the war with Hamas in May, there was an explosion of anti-Semitism in which young disenfranchised people were literally pulling Jews out of restaurants, beating them on the streets, and the sort of the violence of it. But what for me is remarkable, these are almost the stormtroopers. The Nazis had stormtroopers. These are almost the stormtroopers of contemporary anti-Semitism. But what I find even more staggering is the academic environment, the media of record, and the public discourse when it comes to the Jew, when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Zionism, when it comes to Jewish peoplehood. The discourse and the delegitimization and the dehumanization in our universities and in the media of record sets the context, it sets the stage in which the stormtroopers can start pulling citizens who happen to be Jewish out of kosher restaurants, who are walking home on the street, who are going to synagogue, and attack them. And the question is, where is the human rights community? Where are the scholars? Where are the scholars who claim to be liberal? And if you're liberal and progressive, that means you believe in democracy. That means you believe in some sort of notion of justice. That means you believe in citizenship. Citizenship in which every person, every citizen has the right to be equal under one legal system. So where was the outrage? Where was the outrage when Jews are being attacked on the streets? Where is the outrage when opinion poll after opinion poll in the United States shows that more than 80% of a community of Americans are afraid of their future, are afraid of their physical security? And why are we living in this moment as intellectuals where the dominant perspective when it comes to the Jew is so problematic? And I would submit to you that there's no other group in the intellectual environment that is perceived and treated in the same manner intellectually. So I'm going to speak about issues of globalization very briefly, and then come back to some of the issues of anti-Semitism. I think what's very important to understand is, and I think the question is, why in 2021 are right-wing nationalist, populist, reactionary social movements emerging from the United States to parts of Europe and beyond? Why is sort of radical, I would call it reactionary left-wing social movements emerging in the United States and in many other societies? Why has political Islam, which is a reactionary social movement? And when I speak about political Islam, I'm not speaking about Islam, and I'm not speaking about Muslims. I'm speaking about a very specific reactionary social movement that emerges in Egypt 100 years ago as a reaction to British colonialism. And it's a form, it's a social movement that fused a very narrow understanding of Islam with European fascism and even European Nazism. The political Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, which I think many of us have not studied, is a very important social movement to understand. The Muslim Brotherhood, which starts 100 years ago for the first time, brings European anti-Semitism into the Middle East. It takes the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is the lie that helped to create the conditions to remove Jewish people from European society, to marginalize them, to ghettoize them, to remove them from their work and put them into ghettos, and led to the final solution. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a document, a forged document that emerges in France or Russia in the 1880s, 1890s. And it purports to be this conspiracy of Jewish people trying to take over the world, take over society, take over the banks, take over Hollywood, all the lies of and the tropes of anti-Semitism. And as Deborah Lipstadt says, racism, in a sense, is based on notions of superiority and inferiority, and the whiteness of people is supposed to be superior, and they punch down to brown and black people. What's interesting about anti-Semitism is that the racists, the white nationalists, the separatists, they punch up. They punch up to these conspiracy tropes, these anti-Semitic tropes of Jewish domination and conspiracies and power. So they're punching up. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion not only justified the Holocaust, but as Elie Wiesel profoundly said, that the Holocaust did not begin with the crematoriums or the railroad tracks or the concentration camps. The Holocaust began with words and ideas, and the words and ideas of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion lay the foundation to justify the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews and the destruction of tens of thousands of towns and villages that were inhabited by Jewish people across Europe, and the destruction of European Jewry. And it is this reactionary social movement of the Muslim Brotherhood that fuses European anti-Semitism with Islam. And the Muslim Brotherhood was sort of it's the foundational roots of political Islam. And from the Brotherhood, we have different movements, from Daesh to ISIS to Hezbollah to Hamas to Fatah, influenced by the Brotherhood, and even Iran, which is Shiite, and the Egyptians were Sunni. The Iranian revolutionary regime pays intellectual and ideological homage to its roots in the Muslim Brotherhood. And in Iran, for example, in Shiite Islam, they fuse ancient forms of discrimination against Jews with this new form of sort of anti-Semitic political Islam. So in Iran, for example, if you're a Jew, you cannot touch a Muslim. If you're a Jew, you cannot go out in the rain because Jews are impure. And if the water touches the fabric of a Jew and drips onto the pavement, there are fatwas, religious rulings, that the pavement becomes impure. Jews cannot drink from the same water fountains in Iran today. So this is based on a very narrow reactionary social movement and an ideology which sees Jews coming from apes and pigs and being impure and untouchable. And this comes out of European anti-Semitism and the Muslim Brotherhood. And what's interesting about neoliberal globalization and structural adjustment, in the 1980s, there was an agreement by the G7 countries, which was adopted by the IMF and sort of international organizations, that there was this belief in sort of the trickle-down economics of neoliberalism. And there was a perception that the state, which interfered in economic activities, right, states rather, in places like Egypt, the state subsidized people's income, education, healthcare. There was food subsidies. In more advanced countries such as Canada, where I'm from originally, the social democratic state was strong, that provided education, healthcare, housing, unemployment, welfare at a very high level. So for example, I went to McGill University, which is a world-class university in Montreal. And in those days, it's changing now, the state subsidized my education to the point where it was about $400 US a year to go to school at McGill. And if you go south of the border, of course, the tuition rates are infinitely higher. Healthcare, even though Quebec was a very society with strong nationalism and a rift between the British and French and minorities, all Quebecois had a strong affinity to our education system, our healthcare system. So state intervention helped to create notions of national identity and citizenship that was that sort of cemented, if you will, the fragmentation that could exist in a society to a strong sort of modernist notion of identities. In the 1980s, there was this belief that if you allow neoliberal economic development to enter into societies, if you would weaken the state and not allow the state to intervene in its economic activities, but to create a more free market, there was this belief with the free market system, there would be more economic development, and with more economic development, there would be more notions of sort of political democratic development, more higher notions of freedom and the like, that the removal of the state or the limitation of the state will allow for more growth, and with the more growth, there'd be more democracy. But what we have seen in the last several decades is that as the state withdrew from society, more and more people globally have been marginalized. States have, in some instances, collapsed. States are failing in places like Sudan, in Iraq, in Syria. The failing of these states have allowed war and crisis to ensue. And this sort of refugee immigration crisis of people coming from parts of East Africa, the Middle East, even in West Africa, the refugee crisis in Syria, where millions of people were going into Turkey, and from Turkey, Erdogan, who's also close to the Muslim Brotherhood, is sort of turning the tap off and the tap on, depending when he's negotiating with the European Union, of refugees coming into Europe, which then is also creating sort of this reactionary nationalist movement in parts of Europe as a response to the ineffectiveness of European borders, safeguarding its notions of citizenship and the state. So we have political Islam emerging in this sort of vacuum of power, and we have reactionary social movements that are also responding to this or developing as this crisis deepens. So, and what's also interesting is that political Islam perceives the state as a vestige of Western imperialism and colonialism. So they want to destroy the state and replace it with a caliphate. So, and neoliberalism wanted to weaken the state. So this vacuum has been filled and is being filled as we speak by different forms of political Islam. Afghanistan, as we speak, is going to become a Taliban. It appears as if it's becoming a Taliban state in a very rapid pace. So what are the conditions? Why are these sort of levels of marginality and despair for many swaths of citizens of many countries? And why is political Islam sort of emerging? Why is right-wing extremism and white supremacy and nationalism emerging? And why is sort of this sort of, I call it reactionary, sort of politically woke left-wing movements that are more anti-Western hegemony? That's part of, I think, an important part of their ideology. And in a sense, there's this red-green alliance, which we'll hear more about during the Summer Institute, where the radical left and political Islam actually team up together. And it's being played out in universities as we speak, because they're both against notions of Western superiority, Western power, Western hegemony. So they both have a common agenda of attacking Western power. So you have a reactionary religious social movement in bed with people who claim to be progressive and liberal and trying to improve democratic standing, working together at various levels in this sort of struggle against the center. So I think, in a sense, these anti-systemic movements are emerging, and there's an attack on the center, the economic and political center, that is emerging and I think rapidly evolving. So that's sort of the context in which I think we have to begin to understand contemporary anti-Semitism and why are these sort of emerging reactionary social movements happening now? And why is anti-Semitism a core element, not a peripheral element, but a core element of these movements? And you'll hear more about it during the week of classes. I want to sort of quote Edward Said. An interesting, Edward Said and Michel Foucault, very important intellectuals at this moment. These were two people who perceived, and they were spending time in France in the 1970s with exiled leaders of the Iranian revolutionary regime. And they wrote and they perceived that the Iranian revolutionary movement was going to be akin to what French Enlightenment was to the French Revolution. And Foucault and Said supported the Iranian Revolution. They didn't look at the vulgar anti-Semitism of the movement. And they didn't look at the way Jews were perceived or the way women were going to be treated or gay people or notions of religious pluralism in this reactionary social movement. They just perceived the attack on Western hegemony and Western imperialism as something to support. And I think that sort of, in a way, typifies this sort of fascination with these sort of emerging movements in the Middle East, the sort of the racism of low expectations. And what Said said, in a way, it was in 1976, he was arguing that he, Palestinian, claims to be Palestinian, it's another issue if he was, but he identified as Palestinian, that he argued that he was the last Jewish intellectual, that he was the inheritor of the work of the Frankfurt School of Thought and Adorno. The Frankfurt School of Thought, as many of you know, was developed and run by mostly Jewish intellectuals who survived the Holocaust. They were refugees and returned to Frankfurt to create this sort of neo-Marxist, progressive school of thought in the Frankfurt School of Thought. And it was run by predominantly Jewish intellectuals who survived Nazism, and they wrote, Adorno and Horkheimer wrote very important books and articles and developed concepts about anti-Semitism and fascism and the Holocaust. So Said says in 1976 that he is the inheritor of Adorno, Horkheimer, and the Frankfurt School, and that he's the last remaining Jewish intellectual. And he stated that the Jewish intellectuals of America were basically in the suburbs getting fat, and they were consuming, and they had abandoned their cause, if you will, to be true intellectuals. And that he argued that the Palestinians were the Jews, that he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, and that the Jews and the Zionists and the Israelis were the Nazis. So in 1976, for him to utter this preposterous twisting of history and flipping of history was really on the margins of academic thought. Fast forward to 2021, and we see how this lie has not only sort of lodged itself at one of the most important kind of philosophical moments of our time among the intellectual and academic community, that are in our best universities in the Western world, this type of perception, this sort of kind of structured understanding of reality has become mainstream education. So if, as Said said, that the Palestinians are the Jews and the Zionists and the Israelis are the Nazis, if Israel is a Nazi state, if Israel is a racist state, if Israel is an apartheid state, from a liberal, progressive human rights perspective, we no longer need to be objective. We no longer have to engage in serious academic scholarship to ascertain if Israel is such an entity as people claim it is. But from a liberal human rights perspective, we would be morally and politically obligated to dismantle that entity if it were to be true. And this is what is going on in the world. We're going to hear from an amazing woman during the week. Her name is Mrs. Landau. Mrs. Landau is a Holocaust survivor. She'll tell her story, but part of her story was that she was hiding in the forests of Poland during the Holocaust, and her mother had disappeared and one of her siblings had passed away, but she gets to a point where she's with a brother and her father, and they're standing at a pit in the forest. And the Nazis lined up the Jews that they found hiding in the forest. She was living on leaves and worms and barely able to stand from malnutrition. And the line of Jews were shot by Nazis, and somehow her father pushed her in the pit and she survived. She was unharmed and crawled out of the pit when the Nazis left, and crawled to a farm, and a group of righteous Gentiles, Polish farmers, nursed her back from being on the verge of starvation and death. And she was able to eventually migrate to Israel, where she has 3 children and I think 6 grandchildren. And she's lived an amazingly productive and healthy life. She'll be speaking with us. But here is a woman that was lined up to be exterminated, to be shot because she wasn't white, because the Jews were poisoning the purity of the white Aryan nation, the white Aryan race, and the Jews had to be exterminated. And today in her lifetime, today, now, her grandchildren are going to universities where they are being taught that Jews are white. And it's not, sorry what happened in the past, excuse us and welcome to the club, and sorry but welcome. No, the Jews have become the quintessential embodiment of colonialism, of racism, of apartheid, of segregation, and of elitism. Imagine, the Jew has been defined as not white, to be exterminated, and today the enemies of the Jewish people, are now labeling us as white supremacists, the epitome of whiteness, the epitome of colonialism, the epitome of apartheid, and that our support of our homeland, of Israel and Zionism, is nothing but a conspiracy of domination and white supremacy that has no legitimacy in this world. So in just less than 3 generations, the Jew was wrongly identified as being white, and now as not being white, and now we are being identified as a problem to be dealt with. Imagine. And this is what's happening, not just on the streets of Arkansas or of the working class areas of London or the north of England or the suburbs of Paris. This is happening in Oxford. This is happening in Cambridge. This is happening at Harvard. This is happening at Yale. This is happening at Berkeley. This is happening at our best universities because we've been bought into a series of lies in sort of social theoretical discussion of who a Jew is and what Israel is. This is the underpinning of the intellectual buy-in to the demonization of the Jewish people, which has a long pedigree. This is not something that just popped up. And I won't go into great detail, but in the work that I do, I identify, and my colleagues identify, sort of 3 dominant forms of anti-Semitism. There's a religious form of anti-Semitism, a racist form of anti-Semitism, and now the anti-Semitism that attacks who Jews are as a people. So the Christian notion of anti-Semitism is basically that the Jews were the wrong religion. And because Jews didn't accept the Christian notion of the Messiah, and Rabbi Zweig was so accurate and profound in his lecture, that some groups of people put hoops or hurdles or a criteria to be human. And this is why I think Rabbi Akiva Zweig's lecture is so important. If we're all born in the image of God and we all have a truth, as Emmanuel Levinas says, as the Rastafarians say, I and I, right? The godliness and I. If we're all born in the image of God, we all have a truth. And what Emmanuel Levinas says is that the instant we see our face in the other, Emmanuel Levinas argued, and this is Talmudic education, Jewish ethics, the moment we see our face in the other is the moment that we become human. We need the other to be human. If I'm racist and I don't accept people of African origin, I limit myself. I eliminate 1 billion or so possibilities for me to understand somebody's godliness, to understand the truth in another person. If I'm sexist and I think I'm superior to women, I've dismissed half of the world's population, or more than half of the world's population, for my capacity, for my ability to understand truth, to see the humanity and the godliness in other people. I limit myself. So we need the other. So I don't like the notion of tolerance. We don't tolerate the other. Humility. I need the other to be human. And if I dismiss all sorts of groups of people as not being fully human, I only cheat my capacity to develop as a human being. This is humility as opposed to tolerance. We need the other to be human. This is the teachings of Levinas, and this is the teachings of Jewish ethics and many, many other groups and cultures around the world. So the Christian, going back to the Christian notion, so the Jews were stubborn. They didn't accept the Christian notion of the Messiah. They were perceived as being blinded by evil, right? And if you're blinded by evil and you can't accept the Christian notion of the Messiah, that means that you're condemned and you cannot have redemption. And there was this belief that the stubborn Jews were not only unable to have individual redemption, but they were holding back the bringing of the sort of messianic age. That until the Jews were eliminated or forcibly converted, that the possibility of redemption was being hindered by the Jews. When the dominant perspective of the way the world perceived reality shifted from religion to notions of race and biology and eugenics and all of that sort of thing, which was in the universities. This comes from the universities and science. There was this belief that every racial group had characteristics that were unescapable. So if you were white, if you were African, if you were Jewish, there was no escape. You couldn't convert. In the days of Christianity, you can become Christian. But with this sort of perception of scientific, pseudoscientific notions of racial categories, everybody was sort of cemented in their racial and ethnic identities. So everybody was fixed. So the Jews were perceived as being a threat, sort of poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race, right? And this sort of notion develops and leads to the Holocaust, develops from fascism and Nazism, and this sort of worldview of science, of nation, of race, of ethnicity, which was embedded in Western thought and to a large extent still is, that this led to the Holocaust. You can't convert the Jew, you either have to save the race, you had to eliminate them. So today, in the New York Times or the Guardian or Le Monde or at Berkeley or at Harvard or at Cornell or at the Sorbonne, to be a Christian anti-Semite or a racist anti-Semite is no longer socially acceptable. In fact, I think if anybody uttered that type of anti-Semitism, their careers would be in jeopardy and they would be socially ostracized and maybe their careers would come to an end. But today, speak about Zionism, speak about the whiteness of Jewish power, speak about apartheid Israel and colonial Israel and Jewish power, and dismissing the legacy of anti-Semitism in Western thought and in Western society. It is not only permissible, but I would submit to you that if you want to be a good professor or get a good PhD or get promoted or get tenured or be a journalist at the good newspapers or television stations or social media outlets, that the more anti-Semitic in the contemporary context you are, it's not only a hindrance to your career, but I think it would advance your career. That this is the moment that we live in. So Natan Sharansky mentioned the Durban conference. It's the anniversary of Durban, in which for all sorts of reasons, the NGO community really ganged up and focused on Israel and Zionism and delegitimized it. And this began the sort of anti-apartheid BDS movement, which is, in my estimation, the sort of the tip of the spear of anti-Semitism. And I come to you, I was very active in the anti-apartheid movement. I was the chairperson of the African National Congress Solidarity Committee. I worked with the leadership of the African National Congress. I fought literally on the ground, got shot at in South Africa, fighting the apartheid system. And I remember vividly as a kid at McGill University, a professor gave a lecture on apartheid South Africa. It was in the 1980s. And I went up to him after class and I said, when did apartheid end? And he laughed at me. He said, Charles, it still exists. I couldn't believe it. And I said, well, when is it going to end? He said, at that time, nobody really knew when it was going to end. And here was a system that was based on on Nazi racist thought that still existed in my lifetime. And as a grandson of refugees from different parts of Europe and the Middle East, that this was a struggle that I was very happy and proud to be a part of, because I couldn't believe it, that the ideological system that helped to exterminate European Jewry and members of my family was essentially alive and well in a part of the world. Imagine. But this began the sort of anti-apartheid movement that stopped focusing on South Africa and brought the spotlight to Israel. So this is, I think, an important shift in understanding contemporary anti-Semitism that began about 20 years ago. The work that we're doing at ISGAP, we're looking at the impact of the Muslim Brotherhood. We did a study that took us 8 years with limited resources, and we looked at the funding of the Muslim Brotherhood at American universities. And we discovered, and I think scholars should be particularly worried about this, we discovered over $3 billion with a B dollars from the Muslim Brotherhood that was sent to American universities and not reported to the Department of Education as required by law. 3 billion. Our research helped to launch a federal investigation that began in October of 2019. In July of 2019, I presented in Washington to the head of the FBI, Homeland Security, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Education, Department of Education, and 100 top civil servants. And this has led to an investigation into illegal foreign funding of American universities. Now the investigation has advanced to the point with the resources that the government has, they've now have been able to define that they've received more than $18 billion in funding from American universities that has not been documented. At Oxford University, about a mile from where we're sitting this evening, the Islamic Studies Center. The founding head of the Board of Trustees of the Islamic Studies Center was Yosef Kawadawi. Yosef Kawadawi is the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. He's the head of the Qatari Foundation, which disperses billions of dollars around the world every year. The Oxford's Islamic Studies Center was started by Yosef Kawadawi. Yosef Kawadawi, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, throughout his life says that the true believer, the true Muslim, is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. The true believer is obligated to finish the work of Hitler. This is the place, this is the ideology that universities in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, all over Europe and well beyond receive funding from. Could you imagine if David Duke or the Ku Klux Klan gave billions of dollars to Cornell or to Yale or to Texas A&M? Could you imagine the outcry? But this, ladies and gentlemen, is completely acceptable in the academic environment in which we sit. Billions of dollars coming in and of course impacting on education. The Muslim Brotherhood ideology, and this is core to its mission. This is not the rantings and ravings of the military wing or the extremist wing of the movement. This is core to its ideology. It calls not only for the destruction of the state of Israel, but it calls for the elimination of Jewish people around the world. And this is where universities and publishing houses and PR firms are taking money. On many of our campuses in the United States, we see the Students for Justice in Palestine. We see progressive Americans of all sorts of origins working with Students for Justice in Palestine, mostly some Palestinian, but Muslim. The Students for Justice in Palestine comes out of the Muslim Student Association. The Muslim Student Association is directly a part of the Muslim Brotherhood, directly a part of an ideology that's calling for the extermination of Jewish people. And the propaganda on campuses, the blatant forms of anti-Semitism, which is making the life of American Jewish students and Canadian Jewish students and European Jewish students and faculty very difficult, continues to go on. And my question is, where is the administration? Where are the faculty members? Where are the student groups? Why is it this group? Why is it the Jewish faculty and the Jewish students that have to put up with this vile, direct, open forms of hate on campus? There are no other groups where this form of demonization and the delegitimization is permitted. But when it comes to American Jews or Canadian Jews or European Jews, it's permitted. And we have, as Professor Cohen was saying earlier, we don't have the language. We don't know the landscape. We don't understand the influences and the ideologies and the political agenda of these movements on our campuses, in our institutions, in the halls of Congress, that are promoting this form of hate. And the amazing thing about anti-Semitism, and you'll find it throughout the week, is that we don't have the capacity to decipher, to understand what is behind this, what is going on. I'll just say in 2006, and it's on my reading list, I did an article with Ed Kaplan at Yale University. We interviewed 10,000 people in 10 European countries, and we asked them a series of questions about classical forms of anti-Semitism, that Jews have money and Jews have power, and we, classical tropes. And then we asked them a series of questions about what we call Israel bashing questions, that Israel is an apartheid state, or that the Israeli army intentionally shoots children, or the Israelis poison the water of Palestinians. And what we discovered is levels of anti-Semitism and Israel bashers in the 10 European countries were relatively low, or lower than we anticipated. But what we discovered is that those who were Israel bashers were 13 times more likely to be anti-Semitic in the classical sense. So the correlation between bashing Israel and classical forms of anti-Semitism is off the charts. It's very high. If this bottle of water or this company of Highland Springs, if their water was 13 times more likely to cause cancer than the the other brands of water, this would be removed from the shelf immediately, and there'll be a national inquiry at how this water was sold in shops around the United Kingdom. 13 times more likely. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, we don't understand the context. We don't understand the influences. We don't understand the ideologies. And I remember during the uprising in Egypt, I was at Yale University, and we had this big event at the Jewish Center. The Jewish Center invited 100 professors on the eve of Passover. Passover is celebrating, it's a holiday of freedom, the freedom from slavery. And they invited 100 intellectuals to speak about the uprisings in the Middle East, in Egypt. And I remember all these professors, all these progressive professors were saying, this is wonderful. This is a movement for democracy, and this is a movement for freedom. And every Jew should put a seat at the table for the people struggling in Tahrir Square for freedom and democracy. So I asked, I put up my hand and I said, I hear, I'm not an expert on Islam, but what are the slogans? The people in the square are saying Allah Akbar. The people in the square are speaking about Kawadawi coming back to Egypt, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're attacking people in the square for looking and being Jewish. They're subjugating women. Women in political Islam, according to the Muslim Brotherhood, are essentially property. A woman cannot go out of her home without the permission or the accompaniment of a male adult member of their family. If you're gay, you're killed. If you believe in religious pluralism, Yazdis and Kurds and Copts are lower. The Jews have to be exterminated, right? So this is the movement that intellectuals in the West we're promoting. When President Barack Obama went to Cairo to give his famous speech, when he didn't go to Canada and he didn't go to Europe, but he went to Egypt first, he invited members of the Muslim Brotherhood as his honored guests. So the question is, why in the West, in the United States, in Europe, why are these reactionary forces, these anti-democratic, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic ideas being promoted by our leaders? Why? Why was it at Yale and throughout the United States that people perceived this uprising as something progressive? Why was it that a professor from the University of California by the name of Morsi, from the University of California, Morsi went to lead the Islamic Revolution as a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and became the president of Egypt? Why are these people esteemed members of our communities? Why? So I think, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll go back to the words of Elie Wiesel, anti-Semitism is not only a Jewish problem or a problem for Israel, it is, and it's exploding. But this is an indication, and I think history bears this out, of anti-democratic, anti-humane ideologies on the march. And once we permit the Jew to be demonized, once we permit the Jew of all people to become the epitome of colonialism and racism and elitism and apartheid, of all things, apartheid. Once we permit this, ladies and gentlemen, this is not just the beginning of a conflict with the Jews. This is the beginning of the erosion of our democratic principles, of human decency, of citizenship, and even the university. And I think this, and the university being the space where ideas and debates should be free. And yet, bad Jews are being eliminated. Bad Jews are being eliminated from these conversations. So I think you're in for an amazing week. We have an incredible lineup. I think that the issues, every year that we've been doing this now for 8 years, every year, my opening remarks are saying that, this is a very serious time. And I think after May of 2021, when the Muslim Brotherhood, the Qatari Foundation had over 13 of the top American PR firms running full-time, that the discourse around the war was unbelievable, unbelievable. Here you have a reactionary social movement that stifles any sense of freedom, any sense of equality in Gaza. It's a puppet of Iran. The kinetic theater of war was run by Iran, and Qatar paid the bill. The Muslim Brotherhood paid the bill, and the Muslim Brotherhood was funding 13 PR firms in Washington and New York to run the social media campaigns, to run the stories that were covered in the media. And I think that we really need to understand how anti-Semitism begins with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews, and really to go deep into the ideology of the anti-Semitism that is emerging on the radical left, political Islam, and of course the radical right, and how this is an affront to basic democratic principles and to the safety of not just the Jewish citizens of our societies, but I think to all citizens, particularly vulnerable citizens of society. So I'll end it there, and we have a bit of time to take a few comments or questions. I'll be happy to do that for a bit, and then we'll turn to the film.
I have a comment, but my computer died.
Okay, all right. You want to come here?
Sure.
Okay, so there's a question here at the table. 1 second.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I feel like I'm coming here with so many of these thoughts in mind. And I feel like as a graduate of multiple universities, teaching currently at CUNY Brooklyn, teaching at YU, what you're saying is unfortunately so relevant and so contemporary. When I went to NYU to a master's program and I graduated in 2012, I got so many of these comments from peers in terms of check your privilege as a white person, the kind of privilege you have, blatant professors who made blatantly anti-Semitic comments in class, small classes where I was the only, blatantly Orthodox Jewish student against Orthodox Judaism, against a Jewish, life, internships in which also, blatant anti-Semitism. And when I tried to reach out to rabbis and people to, even to work to do pro-Israel rallies or things against the SJP, I was told, not a good idea. We're not gonna, we don't want to stir anything up. And I said, but they're stirring us up. Why? I'm not saying I should do it side by side. I'll do it on a different day. Let me organize a pro-Israel rally, something. No, and this mentality of the more anti-Semitism that emerges, the quieter we should be and the quieter we should become. Even, in my current university, I'm a student at YU. When I said I want to do my dissertation on anti-Semitism and campus climate, the feedback I got, you will have no career. You will never be able to, you're pigeonholing yourself. This is a terrible niche. It's too much of a niche. It's too little of it. It's just unbelievable that this is kind of what we're dealing with. And so I think it's just such an important topic. And the last thing I'll say is that as I teach at Brooklyn College, City University of New York, and I'm sure many of you maybe have heard that the union just came across to support BDS, and this is a union that we all have to pay dues for, City University, all of the staff. And when I reached out to somebody there to ask how to protest this, I was told that it was, passed by a margin and it's being worked on, and all the back and forth and everything you hear. And at the end of the day, I think there's maybe one faculty member at another school who, made a big deal and was published about it, but I don't really hear people really doing anything. And I just think, what you're saying is so important in terms of, again, just the pervasive anti-Semitism and how the rhetoric has become so normalized globally. So I think you're doing really important work, and I'm excited to be here. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. So thanks for your comments. Can you hear me? You can see me? Yeah, okay. That's good. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's all good.
Okay, yeah, good. Okay. You cut out. Can somebody say something just to make sure?
Yeah, sounds
okay, good. Okay, good. No, so thank you for your comments. And I think the challenge for all of us here as scholars, as academics and students, professors, we have to remember that the anti-Semitism of the time, during the time of anti-Semitism, be it Christian anti-Semitism or racist anti-Semitism, that those prevailing views prevailed. They were dominant. They were dominant in theology. They were dominant in science. They were so-called science, in social theory, in social sciences. It dominated. Now we look back at Christian anti-Semitism or racist anti-Semitism, and we know that it was, morally repugnant and problematic, and it was terrible that was done. But at its time, it dominated. At its time, the Jew didn't have a voice. At its time, the reformers were marginal. And I'm afraid what is happening now is that this dominant perception of Israel and the Jews, which is rooted in the moment, the excellence of this philosophical moment, where our best universities are perpetuating this perception of Israel as an apartheid racist state that is either problematic, that has to be reformed, or is so problematic it has to be dismantled. That this is the prevailing view. And I think as scholars, we have to somehow elevate ourselves or be open to be able to be very critical of the underpinnings of this philosophical moment, this academic moment, which is now bleeding into our media and into the world of policy. And it's a serious challenge. So I see there's a few questions. Christine, but I'm afraid to ask you because of the sound. Okay, you know what, okay. Go ahead.
Does this work?
No, okay.
Charles, try muting your Zoom and then Christine speaks, that might work.
Hello?
Oh no, still echoing.
Okay, so let me turn to Paula.
Okay, unmute. Start my video. First of all, I want to thank you for a superb lecture, and one that has gotten me agitated. I mean, because you are saying things that I hoped would not have to be said to that extreme. But I do think that a lot of what you're saying is true. One of the things, I mean, I hope we're not going to be preaching to the converted here, because we all agree that something is wrong. The question that you raise as to why and within the university this is going on is so interesting and vexed to me. Having been at Columbia when Edward Said was there, I mean, he was my professor. And I want to also say that as deconstruction and Foucault and so forth were gaining traction at the time that I was there as a graduate student, it was all elegant theory. It was entirely outside the realm of practice. And I think that's at the root of what's so insidious about this, is that it took a long time getting to this place, because we all embrace this wonderful world of theoretical justice, deconstruction of hegemony, of imperialism and colonialism and so forth. And then it came home to roost. And now you look around and everything is post-colonial studies. Everything is about colonialism. But that was sown in the 80s when I was in graduate school. But it was not, although for some it may have been linked to some of the ideas you're talking about. I can tell you, I was totally unaware as a Jewish woman at Columbia getting my PhD in English of any of the possibilities associated with this theory. So I don't know if other people feel this way, but I think this makes it particularly difficult to combat, because it's not just something welling up now within the university. It has taken 30 years of a certain kind of theoretical indoctrination in 2 generations of scholars to get to this point. And a lot of the theory is wonderful and interesting and valuable, but applied simple-mindedly, it is insidious. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I agree. So first of all, thank you for your comments. It was a bit disjointed because Akiva was coming and he was late, and then Joan spoke. One of the things that I wanted to say at the beginning, which is really important, and I think, Paula, you just touched on it. The number one rule of the Summer Institute and of ISGAP is that all comments, all criticisms, all perspectives are very welcome. So it's not a question of preaching to the choir. And I think, as Akiva said, that we should be open to good questions. We should be open to everybody's perspective. We're coming, as scholars, we're coming in this moment where I think we need to unpack and some of the points that I made in my lecture, are contentious and they run deep. And I think if people on the program may have different perspectives. Anyways, just please know that your comments, your criticisms, your perspective are always very welcome. And we have this thing at ISGAP. This was before the COVID time. We used to, after the lectures, and hopefully we'll meet again in person next year. You guys will come back or come for the first time. But we used to all go out for dinner into the pub, and the conversations would go on to like 2, 3 in the morning. And there was a lot of debates and arguments. And we had this thing called ISGAP only conversations. And these ISGAP only conversations really, I think, is the essence of what we're trying to do. And it's the essence and beauty of true scholarship, is that we get to challenge each other. And I think all of us are coming from different perspectives. So just please feel very welcome to articulate your perspective and be welcome to be challenged. And the person who's being challenged should then be challenged by you and vice versa. So that's a very important rule that I did not say. So to Paula, I was also a student of that time, and I took courses with Said and other scholars in my day. And I think that, there's something insidious going on related to postmodernity. Look, notions of God, notions of truth, notions of right and wrong, of good and evil, are perceived as passé, right? Everything is sort of relative, if you will. So I think, yeah, I think it's as you say, it's very problematic, and we'll get into tomorrow's first lecture deals with some of these issues. And I think going back to Said's point about how he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, and that the Palestinians were Jews and the Jews were Nazis, you know, it's an amazing form of Holocaust revisionism. At its conceptual core, it's sophisticated Holocaust revisionism, right? It's not just the David Irvings and the clumsy KKK and Nazis that are Holocaust deniers, but this is a very sophisticated form of Holocaust revisionism. And it's also a form, I would say, of Christian anti-Semitism and replacement theory. Think about it. Think about the notion of replacement theory, that the Christians replaced the Jews. They had the covenant. Jesus, who was a Jewish figure resisting Roman control of Israel, which the Romans named Philistine, right? The Romans gave the name as an insult to the Jews, which was the name that we now have today regarding the Palestinian question. And that, in a sense, the Jews were replaced. Said replaces the Jew as well. It's interesting. So it's a double whammy of anti-Semitism. It's Holocaust revisionism and it's replacement theory, which has strong roots in Christianity. Anyways, okay. I see a question from Philip. I see Christine, but I'm afraid to ask her feedback. Okay.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Small, very much for your lecture. And the question that I have arises from a statement you made early in which you mentioned the transition. And so that today, to be a racist anti-Semite, you say is no longer socially acceptable. But to speak about, among other things, you mentioned the whiteness of Jewish power is not only permissible, but often advantageous. And my curiosity is how has anti-whiteness come to be distinguished as non-racist?
So, can you repeat the question again? I just want to make sure I understand you.
Sure, absolutely. You mentioned that there's been a bit of a shift so that it's no longer acceptable, particularly in university, to be a racist anti-Semite, but that it's, you said to speak about the whiteness of Jewish power is not only permissible, but often advantageous. And my question is, how is anti-white or anti-whiteness not racist? So the distinguishing characteristic, I guess, I don't understand how it's not okay to be a racist anti-Semite, but it's okay to be anti-white Jewish power.
Right. Yeah. So I think, so I was saying in the academic, educated environment, to be racist against anybody, racist against Jews, looking back at fascism and Nazism and colonialism and those forms of racisms and in which Jews were victimized as well as others, that is not socially acceptable. That's, having said, I think we've seen in the United States in the last, I don't know, 5 years, I think intensely, probably longer, the sort of reemergence of white nationalism, white supremacy, racism, racist anti-Semitism. That's something that's reemerging that I think is also very important. And we have experts that are going to touch on kind of the reemergence of racist anti-Semitism and racism and xenophobia in the United States. We have a colleague who will be speaking, Joel Finkelstein, that has been looking at the radicalization of white marginalized people in the United States. And I think he argues, and many people argue, that the threat of physical violence by white nationalists and racists and anti-Semites is becoming extraordinarily serious and extraordinarily urgent and should not be underestimated at all. We've had instances in the last few years of lone wolf of mass shootings and violent attacks. And I think there is a racist, xenophobic, nationalistic discourse that's reemerged in the United States that's very serious. So there is racism, and those racists identify Jews and others in their agenda and discourse, and it's very troubling. But I was speaking more in the academic environment, in the sort of liberal, progressive environment, where I think any form of acknowledge or any form of support or tacit or implicit support of white supremacy and fascism and Nazism and the old forms of anti-Semitism would not be socially acceptable. I think if a professor spoke in the name of white supremacy and Nazism at Cornell, I don't think they'd be sticking around too long in their career, even with tenure. So I think in certain institutions, those forms of anti-Semitism are not acceptable. But I think to label Jews as apartheid supporters, as white, as the epitome of white elitism, is an acceptable form of anti-Semitism, and the sort of I think it was Emmanuel Castells who wrote that culture is a terrain of struggle. And I think a way that you can measure people's power is their capacity and their ability to define themselves. And obviously during the Holocaust and in Europe, the Jew could not define themselves. They were defined. And I think what's happening now in the university and in certain political circles is that the Jew is being defined in a way that's antithetical to Jewish identity, as being white, and being a part of the whole legacy of colonialism and slavery, and which Jews essentially weren't a part of it, but they're being perceived or constructed as being key players in this form of development of societies, of colonialism, of racism, which is just historically wrong. So that's what I meant. So in terms of being anti-white, yeah, I think to be anti anybody is a problem, as Akiva wisely spoke. But having said that, and I say it very, very seriously in all of its implications, but at the same time, I think we have to be mindful of the fact that in the United States, for example, the legacy of slavery, the legacy of Jim Crow, the contemporary forms of marginality, of racism, of segregation, of the lack of access to goods and services and elements of societies by people of African origin, particularly people who came to the United States, descendants of slaves, that part of the African American community in particular, and other groups. Yeah, I think we have to be very critical of those structures of power and domination in society. Not to be anti-white, but I think to be anti-racist in a sense. So I don't know if I respond to your question. Okay. Thank you. So Christine will come to the podium.
Ask your question to Charles.
I can repeat it. You want to say something? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Oh, no. All right. So I'll repeat the question.
Okay. So I found your talk both profoundly insightful and at the same time equally profoundly depressing. In fact, to the point that it might be hard for any individual, myself, to think that I could possibly find a way to do anything that would make a difference against the tsunami of and hate and racist anti-Semitism, etc., etc., etc. So actually, to me, that's why I'm here, because I think that the curriculum development effort of ISGAP that you are supporting in this workshop is, to me, the only way that I think I, as an individual, may be able to help stomp out ignorance, which I think is foundational, by focusing on what happens at what I would say is a sort of very lowest part of the ADL pyramid, right, and of hate, and helping people to become aware of their inherent biases, and from that awareness to find ways to care about what is happening in their own community, because unless it's made relevant to each individual who then becomes, if you can make them more aware of what they're seeing, what they're feeling, etc., then maybe we can make that kind of.
So I'll repeat the question. Can you read like, what did you say? Very succinctly, I think Christine Maxwell said that she basically thought the lecture was important, but as important or as profound, she says, as it was also quite depressing. Profoundly depressing. And, you know, so what can we do? If, I guess what I was saying, if there's truth in what I was saying today in my talk, you know, what can we possibly do as educators to deal with issues of anti-Semitism or this tsunami of anti-Semitism? So, yeah, so Elie Wiesel, you know, the witness to the Holocaust, Nobel Peace Prize winner, he was a teacher, a wise man. He said at the Canadian Parliament in 2003 that we're living in a time of crisis with the emergence of anti-Semitism. And then he said, no, we're not living in a time of crisis, we're living in a time of a great emergency. And he was never so terrified of anti-Semitism in 2003 as he was in 1945 at the end of the Holocaust when he was liberated and almost died. So from 2003 to 2021, we all know that things have degenerated, things are much more serious. The problem is much more acute. So we are living in a time of a crisis. I think what we can do, if you look at the work of Edward Said, you know, in a sense, the Jewish intellectuals have seeded the universities. Some of our best minds have gone to think tanks, have gone into other careers because they just didn't have the space to do their work on these issues. And I think it's a struggle. You know, all of the scholars that are going to be addressing us this week, if you speak to just about any of them personally, we all have scars. It's a struggle just to get the subject matter on the academic map because it's so, we've been so demonized. You know, if I'm coming to support the apartheid, Zionist, white supremacist, elitist regime, you know, how can I possibly come and be at the table? I should be perhaps in, you know, prison or wherever. So the struggle is serious, and it is a struggle. And the legacy of anti-Semitism in Western civilization is core to the civilization, be it Christianity, be it the church, be it Marxism, read Marx on the Jewish question, whether it's the left or the right, it's central to Western thought. So what's happening today should not surprise us. It's endemic in systems of thought and systems of knowledge, and the legacy and its history and its pedigree is deep. It's deep. You know, if we have a lexicon, we understand how race and gender is reflected in urban environments, in our language, in our culture. We don't have the same levels of education when it comes to contemporary anti-Semitism. We don't understand how entrenched it is. So if we're students of anti-Semitism, we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't be surprised.
Do you think that Professor Landis' ideas and contribution relating to pattern, as he said, what is your comment in that regard to what we're talking about now?
So there's a secondary question, but I think what we are doing at ISGAP is important. Look, there's an ecosystem evolving, fighting anti-Semitism. There's groups training students. There's all sorts of programs on campuses. There's groups of people looking at anti-Semitism in the media. There's groups of people trying to change policies of cities and states and governments around the world, and they're meeting with some success. So within this emerging ecosystem, ISGAP's role is to fight anti-Semitism on the battlefield of ideas and in the universities. And if you look at our enemies, and they're enemies of truth, they're enemies of the Jewish people, they're enemies of democracy. They have been able to not only infiltrate the university, but they've become a very important part of the university landscape, and they're changing hundreds of thousands. Kids go to school to learn how to become citizens. And the journalists, the leaders of industry, the future politicians, the future professors are learning to hate the Jewish people and to hate Israel and to hate, again, drawing on a legacy that's deep. So I think in a small way, we've educated 350 people through our program. It's a drop in the bucket. There's about 45 people online tonight who will be teaching courses. You're bright, educated people. You'll create your own course in your own voice. You know, it's truthful to your area of expertise and your understanding of anti-Semitism. But it's so essential to legitimize the study of anti-Semitism, not just train the students who are fighting it alone, but the professors are the adults in the room. The professors stay at the institution for decades. And if professors start to engage the issue and legitimize this issue, and we begin to create a lexicon, a language of what is and isn't anti-Semitism. Is it okay to criticize Israel? Is it not okay? Is it anti-Semitic or not? We're not comfortable as scholars in really creating a space where we understand what is anti-Semitism, what is anti-Semitic discourse, and to confront it. We're not on solid footing, and we need an intellectual framework. We need serious, high caliber, interdisciplinary scholarship. We need publications. We need to educate the professors. Professors have to educate the students. And we need to get this on the academic map urgently. And you'll see it from the program. You'll meet amazing people with different perspectives, different areas of expertise, but they're dealing with the issue. And I think this is not going to be a quick solution. This will take a generation if we're fortunate. Okay. So there's two more questions. So Christine, thank you. Sammy Apple. So first, Mr. Martin Oliner is here, and then Sammy.
Thank you, Professor Small. I just wondered to the horror that we're all talking about and the dreadful state that anti-Semitism is. Perhaps this is a question for Rabbi Akiva. At the same time, Jewish pride, the ability to stay Jewish, has been diminished internally, not just externally. How does that play a role in anti-Semitism and in the entire conversation that we're having today and that you're going to have all week?
It's a great question. Akiva, are you still online? I think Akiva may not be there, so I'll respond. Thank you for your question, Marty. So, yeah, I think it's a profound question. And ultimately, the Jewish community has to ensure that young Jewish citizens, particularly in the United States of all countries for all sorts of reasons, which I won't get into, but that young Jewish Americans receive a basic level of education on their amazing culture and heritage and wisdom, and be proud of who they are and be proud of our shared legacy as Jewish people. And I think what's happening in the United States is that fewer and fewer Jewish Americans are receiving a proper education, which is tragic in my humble opinion. And what's worse is that the onslaught of attacks against Jews, not just physically, but particularly in the academic environment, is reprehensible. And if a young Jewish kid goes to university and they're not prepared, they don't know who they are, they don't know who their legacy is, and suddenly they're being called all sorts of, horrific things. If you're called a racist at a multicultural, postmodern university in 2021, that's the greatest insult. There's no greater insult. And if the kids are not prepared to know who they are, what our identity is, how we really identify as Jews, not as white or not as racially Semitic, but we have a heritage of wisdom and culture and learning, then these kids are lost. And a lot of them are actually just staying out of the fray. Some of them are actually joining, if you will, the enemy just to kind of fit in. they're kind of rudderless. And yeah, so I think Jewish education and knowledge is essential. And I was just having a conversation with some people at Yeshiva University. And, you know, the question is, we use the legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois as an interesting case. So Du Bois was this great African-American intellectual. He did a philosophy degree in Berlin. Anyway, he couldn't get a job in the United States because he was dealing with racism and the legacy of slavery. And that just wasn't acceptable in universities until the 1950s or 60s. So Du Bois was forced, although he embraced, working in historically Black colleges. And he was a marginal figure in academia until probably about 15 or 20 years ago, when he became popular in mainstream academia. And the question is, you know, do we focus on building programs in places like Oxford or the Ivy League, or maybe it's time to build an amazing program at a place like Yeshiva University and develop not only an understanding of what anti-Semitism is in 2021, but to also develop a sense of pride. You know, there's a great book looking at anti-Semitism and looking at the gay movement of the gay pride movement of the 1980s and 90s as maybe a model in which the American Jewish community should use to fight anti-Semitism. We need a bit of pride. We need self-knowledge and self-love. So yeah, these are very big questions and important questions. So thank you, Marty. Okay, I see Larry and then Sammy. If you put up your hands, I'll see if anybody else has any comments. So Larry?
Yes, very quickly. Can you hear me first?
Yeah, I hear you well.
Okay. Absolutely stunning lecture, Charles. I mean, I've heard you talk many times, but this was an incredible summary. And putting together what you and Zweig says, it seems to me that there is something in common between the different eras of anti-Semitism and the different forms of anti-Semitism. And what that is to sort of take a page out of Rabbi Zweig's way of thinking. What the message of the Jews has been is a message of diversity of opinion, a message of accepting intellectual debate, of not having the truth be fixed. And so we are been the enemy throughout history of any totalizing dogma, whether that totalizing dogma was Christianity, whether the totalizing dogma was the racism of the Nazis, or whether the totalizing dogma was postmodernism. I think the common theme is that we have never accepted a totalizing dogma, and therefore we are the enemy of anyone who wants to promote such a thing.
Yeah, I agree. We're in the business of pulling down false prophets, perhaps. But yeah. Well said, Larry. Sammy. Sammy, you're muted.
Okay. Listen, I like to bring you back a second to the anti-Semitism on campus and on the left. If you well remember, after the fall of the Soviet Union, what I would call the widows and orphans of Stalin convened the Foro de Sao Paulo. 1 year after the fall of the Soviet Union in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Over 500 American professors or intellectuals were present over there. And from there, it kept convening every other year called the Foro Social Mundial, World Social Forum, which is like a Durban thing in Latin America. And the core teaching that came out of that was that not only the attack, they have to find a cause, a common cause to find a way to survive as communist or socialist, whatever you want to call it, And they found it in Israel, in the anti-Israel movement, and in the anti-Semitic movement. This has come back, and this was 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. And now we see that many of those people that were teaching that then have taught other students, and those students have become professors, and so on and so forth. And now we have like an epidemic. So I like for you to address it also the anti-Semitism that is coming from the left, because I perceive that anti-Semitism is ideological. It has an ideological base. It doesn't have a necessarily racial thing or religious hate. No, it's an ideological situation with them. Can you address that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. No, so I think I tried to. I think that the sort of called the Red-Green Alliance, the anti-Western hegemonic movement that gets support from the radical left politically, but also among intellectuals connected to postmodernity, is it comes out of that. Said's hijacking of the Frankfurt School is sort of at a philosophical level connected to it. But yes, so Stalinism played a role in anti-Semitism for sure, in the Middle East, in the intellectual level. So anti-Semitism, I'd say, is almost like an onion. You can kind of keep, peeling away at it. There's so many layers. There's a religious layer, the ideological layer. You have it from the left, you have it from the right, you have the racist, you have the anti-racist. Yeah, it's a complex hatred. So I think these issues will be addressed during the week, Simon. So thank you. And I think we're going to take one more question. I think Mr. Rowlands, you had a question. Now I don't see you on the screen. Is your hand still up? Is he still here?
Yes, I'm here, but I think the previous speaker hand was up. So I thought, I saw it on the screen, I thought mine was up, so I decided to cross-check. I didn't mean to put my hand up. Sorry.
All right. You have a question or no?
Yes.
No.
I think I'm beautiful. I'm so happy. I'm just taking notes, and I think I'm happy with all the lecture you've given. Yes.
Okay. There's a follow-up. Does anybody else have a question online? Okay, so we're gonna have one final question here. Yeah. Okay, comes to that. Yeah. And then we'll finish. So
So just to follow up on what Christine said, I feel like also in terms of what we can do I don't know if this is controversial, in like a socially acceptable way, because when I was going through the readings and, it talks about, the issues in the liberal movement and the feminist movement and Black Lives Matter, and like my school partially funded me to come back and give 2 lectures. And even though it is YU, it's a very liberal school in YU. And I was reading it and I'm like, I can't say any of this. So I don't know how I can speak about this and, make a difference in general, but also coming back home pragmatically, just in the culture of what a current university campus is.
So I would say, I don't think it's a question of liberalism. We have, there's all forms of anti-Semitism we're dealing with on the right, on the left, in the anti-racist movement, in the racist movements. And I think if you look through the syllabus, it's not a question of liberalism or anti-liberalism. The professors speaking here come from different perspectives. And I will say one thing, some of them I don't agree with on many issues, but their work is stellar. These are serious scholars. And I assure you that any university, if you're dealing a curriculum and you're building it off some of the professors you're going to hear or some of the readings, there's no university in the Western world that can limit what you're saying. This is all serious, high caliber stuff, I assure you. And if you have detractors, okay, engage them, debate them. But if anybody censors you, especially Yeshiva University, I'd be deeply troubled. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think we're going to end it here. And then one of the last parts of the evening is that you're supposed to watch the film. And I think I'm going to turn things over to Ira Guberman, who could instruct you on how to access the film. It's called 24 Days. It's a story about Ilan Halemi, who's a young French Jewish kid who lived in Paris, and he was kidnapped. It's sort of based on what happened to him. And I'll just warn you, the film starts off, it's a bit kitschy. It doesn't look like a sophisticated Hollywood film, but you'll see after about 20 or 30 minutes, it starts to get better. That's my understanding. So I urge you to watch it. Okay, Ira.